People seem to think, what drug can I take, or what's the thing I'm missing?
Science is not the art of knowing the truth. It's getting as close to it as we can get at the current moment.
Physique Collective.
You know, when people say like masteron will shed your hair, but androgen load in and of itself will contribute towards hair shedding. So nandrolone will contribute towards shedding, less than testosterone for sure, but at what cost?
I deal a lot with erectile dysfunction with clients. Be like, we'll change this thing and this will fix you. I haven't changed all. And like, oh shit, my dick works.
A lot of these nootropics over the year, there's genuine clinical efficacy in individuals that have neurodegenerative disease, or if they potentially have damaged GABA system, if they've used a lot of benzodiazepines for a long period of time, or more common in the bodybuilding world, they've used a lot of phenibut or something like that, then it would have good clinical efficacy.
Do you have an opinion on semaglutide and muscle wasting?
If presented with evidence, it would be really if I didn't change my mind.
I don't want my parents saying I'm doing steroids. Let's show them the toys instead.
What is the reason that you guys prefer to avoid EQ?
To be honest,
before starting this podcast, I just wanted to say that ideating steroids for a full show is not widely accepted because it discounts the real work, which is the backbone of this sport. And unfortunately spreads that an unsafe chemical solution is all you need for results. Both of these are antithetical to society's understanding of the sport. And while there will always be some that claim that PEDs are all you need, I would like to deliver an honest message of what is required for achieving top performance, as well as the dangers associated with this route. I received this comment from a user named Nightscarens. But just as a rock climber, the athletes undergoing this path in the sport are willing to put their life on the line for their passion. Just the danger between the two sports is different. Luckily, we do have safety nets in the sport, such as organ imaging and regular blood work. But that doesn't change the high risk one must accept in taking on this competitive lifestyle. Did you say you said your mom is the way you first injected was your mom?
Yeah, she did my first. Well, not like every shot, but there was a few I got her to do for me. Yeah.
What an MVP, bro! That's fucking sick.
Loved my mum.
Thanks, mum.
Yeah, I didn't get any gains though. So.
Did you like introduce the fact that you were going to start like gear?
No, it was rough, man, because
her,
she actually this is so bad because I did lie to her and I regret it. I came home one day and I'd been sold Dianabol, but you know, guys from the UK used to go and get the Egyptian Dianabol, and it was like a little blue something or other. And so the guy at my gym had sold me the blue Dianabol and some tests and said, for your first cycle, you do 2 mils of the test and you do 3 of those Dianabol a day. And I had them in a shoebox in my bedroom. And I came home one day and it was like my day to pin. And I opened it and it was gone. And I was like, oh no. I was like, Mum, where have you put that stuff that was in my shoebox? So I don't want you doing that, etc., etc. And this is where the lie comes, which is so bad. I said, Mum, I went to the doctor and I've got low testosterone. And that's what he's prescribed me. And she didn't believe it at all. But I think at the end of the day, she was like, he's an adult. I think I was 19 or 20 or something like that.
Damn.
Yeah. And
everyone's got a bad story. So when I started, I bought off one of my friends, and I must have been, how old are you, Joe?
30.
Were you?
And 19. I think I was 20.
Yeah, I was at uni, so let's say I was 19, right? And I bought off one of my friends, and he sent it to my family home. Big letters on the side, steroids.
No, that can't be true.
In a needle box, he wrote on the. Obviously, he wrote my address, and I got it. Obviously, didn't want to tell my parents. So what I did, I emptied it out and then put it back in my room, full of sex toys and like lube and everything.
That's better,
because I thought that was better for her to find that than her to find loads of steroids. And I thought, I've sussed this.
He sent it to you.
He sent it. to me.
That's Royal Mail, obviously.
Yeah,
doing their due diligence.
They don't care
what's being posted.
It's legal there, but I thought, I don't want my parents.
It's not legal to post.
I don't want my parents seeing I'm doing steroids. Let's show them the sex toys instead.
No, all day I'd rather. wouldn't you rather your parents found gear as compared to like a dildo or something?
You don't know my parents.
Man, I can't. I hope
that question, isn't it?
Hope my parents don't find anything. But
ideally, yeah.
They know the content I do already, so it's too late for that.
There you go. Right. Are we cracking on then?
Yes.
Has it already started?
Yes, it started.
All
right. Anyways,
by the way.
By the way, guys, we're with a Physique Collective, and Joe and Matt flew all the way here from UK, which is honestly, I can't even like express how much I appreciate that.
No, thank you for having
to be able to talk to you guys.
We
in person.
appreciate anybody that will let us ramble. So, yeah. So for context, we flew in yesterday, and which was Wednesday, was it?
Wednesday yesterday.
So I'm all confused on the days because this is such a strange time zone shift. We're 8 hours behind. No.
Yeah. 8 hours behind.
No. Yeah. No, we're 8 hours ahead.
UK is 8 hours ahead of us right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
We're
So
8
right
hours
now,
behind of normal.
Yeah. And it came out so bad for me because I had to get up at like 3 a.m. on Wednesday to get all my client work done. But I've got somebody visiting, and we were out Tuesday night. So I got about 2 hours sleep Tuesday to Wednesday.
Oh my God.
I had to get up and walk 3 dogs, do all my client check-ins. My wife took me to the airport, and then I thought, I'm going to force myself to stay awake on the plane all the way here.
What?
Because then I'll sleep when I get there.
Yeah.
Because we were landing at the time I normally get up in the morning.
Yeah.
And so I did. I slept as soon as we got here. It was probably, what was it, like 8:30 p.m.? But then I woke up at my normal time in England. So I woke up like 90 minutes later, and I couldn't get back to sleep.
Oh, no.
So then today I just got up, did all my check-ins, we trained. So it's like in 3 days I've had about 5 hours of sleep.
No
So
way.
I apologise to anybody listening if this isn't like very coherent. I'm going to try my best.
I woke up smug as fuck because I've had 8 hours sleep. I took a Zoplicone, 8 hours straight through. Woke up about 4 a.m. LA time, which is midday UK time. And Joe sat there at the kitchen table working.
Yeah, doing my check.
I said, how long have you been up? He's like, 1 o'clock. I was like,
Yeah.
you fucked it.
I was jealous. I had to do some like, don't be angry at him.
I said, I'm tired. And he goes, fuck off.
Well, anyways, so basically, I guess I would assume that most of you guys have probably seen the podcast with Dr. Mike. And if not, during the podcast, I was discussing PEDs with him, and Jared kindly recommended that I talk to you guys in regards to a lot of these subjects. So
much love to the RP team. Those guys are awesome.
Love working with them. I actually coach one of the guys behind the scenes, and you coach.
Well, I've consulted with Dr. Mike on PEDs quite a few times, but my relationship's mostly with Jared in the sense of I coach his nutrition, PEDs, but basically everything other than his training, and have done for a little while. And I love Jared to bits. He's a legend.
They're super nice guys as well because they've got sort of no ego at all. They sort of said on your podcast, which is great, by the way, that was a sick episode.
Thanks, man.
They said, like, these guys are who we look to for this, and they kindly mentioned us. But Jared's got no ego. He passes some of his clients for like acne consultations over to me. He obviously outsources to Joe, and all they want is the best. So like them putting us in that conversation is just amazing. We're like so proud to see.
Yeah, no, they're really like open, very friendly people, and honestly, like way more than I even expected, because I actually ran into them at Zoo Culture, which is like Brad's gym. It's like 5 minutes from me, and I just remember thinking like, holy shit, this is Dr. Mike. It's Jared.
Isn't he absolutely ginormous when you sit next to him?
Yeah.
He looks jacked on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, but when you see him in person, like,
he's funny as hell, man, as well. If he didn't do what he's doing, stand-up comedy, like, he is a funny guy.
Oh yeah, we went out for dinner in London recently, and my wife came, and I remember on the drive home she was like, you know what, I think Dr. Mike is the single funniest person I've ever met in my life. Like, she was howling all night.
But yeah, Jared just came up to me like, and smiling, just super friendly, super open, and was just like, dude, I've seen your content, like we would love to like shoot some, you know, footage with you, like do a YouTube video workout with you and everything, and blah blah blah. And that's how it happened. So
yeah, I think
super
the thing
friendly
with sorry, I cut you off a bit there. The thing that drew me originally to RP was that it's very similar to the way that we want to do things, is there's absolutely no emotional attachment to any one particular vector in the physique development space. It's, I don't care what it is. Let's say this study on high volume, this study on low volume. I like to train with high intensity. I like to train with low intensity. For those guys, it's, I will do anything that makes me a better bodybuilder. Mm-hmm. No firmly held emotional attachments to anything, which brings forth a very rational approach to any new evidence. Mm-hmm. And I've really pressed for myself, and I know you do, Matt, to try to be as emotionally devoid in any research gathering or decision making on anything.
Yeah,
because you've seen it in bodybuilding. You know, it's training's a really easy one to use. You could say you've got the low volume, high intensity crowd, or the high volume crowd. And then if there's a piece of supporting evidence for either one sort of sect, the other one will actually get personally offended by it. You know, it's almost religious in nature. And I think that's a dangerous way to go if you're looking to optimize outcomes.
Right.
You know?
You've got to be willing to change your mind. And that's what I like about the RP guys, is what we do all the time. I'll say all the time, but we change our mind on stuff. It'd be like if you found, I don't know, some research on something, you're like, oh shit, that's something that's way better than what I'm doing right now. You're not like, nope, fuck it, I've done it that way forever, I'm going to stick doing my thing. You'd be like, I'll try that. That's what the RP guys do, that's what we do. And I think naturally you're going to align with people like that who are a bit more kind of growth mindset driven, rather than, nah, I'm always doing this way because that's who I am. Like, I'm always going to train like that. I always think of intermittent fasting. You see the guys like, I only intermittent fast. You're like, why? Like, what? If you want to, cool, but are they trying to get all their clients to do it, and that's the only way they promote? So the minute that research is sort of questioned, they're like, no, we're fighting everyone. So
well, it's bigger than ever now, isn't it? You look at like carnivore diet versus plant-based diet. You know, each one of them is 100% sure that they're right, but one of them has to be wrong. And to be honest, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But that emotional grip on things, and we, like, when we started the app, we were talking off air earlier about some of the maxims that we wanted to put into our business when we put the app together. But that was such a symptom of the more popular bodybuilding apps or educational platforms in the UK that it was absolutely camp based on, this is the way we do drugs, this is the way we train, this is the way we eat, this is what we wear. It was like so identity driven that we wanted to be like the open platform for free discussion without fear of bashing or anything like that, to not have us here and everyone else there, but maybe we can facilitate us all learning together, right? To come to, because, you know, science is not the art of knowing the truth, really. It's getting as close to it as we can get at the current moment.
Right. You'll never know.
Yeah. With that mentality, you're like, it's almost like you're putting a sheath over your ability to get closer to that truth. Because I've had quite a few criticisms over my career from people that say, well, you're saying this now, you said this a couple of years ago, you changed your mind on everything. And I've always thought, that's true, you're correct. But it would be really problematic if I didn't change my mind, if presented with evidence that was sufficient for me to change my mind. Because I now know that what I previously thought was wrong. And if I keep perpetuating that wrongful assertion, I don't help myself and I don't help anybody.
Right. That's that growth mindset, though. And I think the other bit I would focus on would be, if you're telling everyone that you're right, like you're telling everyone this is the right way to do it, this is the only way you can do it, I think you kind of have to get stuck to saying that forever, or else you've changed who you are. But you also run the risk of actually maybe not looking like the expert that everyone, like you want everyone to think you are, which is something we've always tried not to do. Like we're not sort of sit here saying this is the way. Like, it's not like this is the only way you can take drugs, this is the only way you can train. We go, this is what we think based on the evidence might be the best way, but I'm not your dad, right? I'm not going to make you do anything. And so I think having that, let's say, growth mindset definitely helps on that front.
I think the part that makes it difficult, though, for most is, I mean, if you think as people get older, I'm not sure if it's technically not just like the fact that neuroplasticity isn't really as probable as you grow older and older, but also like, say that you're someone that's been living a certain way for 50 years and now new research comes out and everyone's like, this is actually the most optimal way. It's kind of like a breaking of your reality and everything that you've ever like put work in to know that like, oh my God, like, so this wasn't the most optimal, or this wasn't the only way to do it. Like, it's kind of hard to like absorb.
You don't want to believe that you've wasted time.
Right. And I kind of saw that in this podcast. I think it was Dr. Mike in Fawad's podcast, maybe. Oh yeah. But they were discussing, I think they were just discussing the results of hypertrophy based off of like rep ranges and how it shows that like as long as you get, close to failure, you can do 8 reps or you can do 30. And it basically yields the same amount of hypertrophy. And that was like super mind blowing, super mind blowing for them.
Yeah.
And it caused this huge argument because it is kind of crazy to think like, I mean, that's a massive difference.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, the massive difference being in that there's not a great difference. And it seems like the more literature that comes out, again, in any vector of bodybuilding, it's like what happens when you extrapolate all the data on the anabolism of all of the anabolic androgenic steroids that we've got, is like they end up all being, and I'm talking about just genomic stuff here, like what they do at the androgen receptor, they all end up being about the same within the working ranges of milligrams that we use. And it's like, oh man, but we've done this stack all the time, or that stack all the time, or what are we going to do about metabolite accumulation if I don't have my high reps? It ends up in this place is like none of it ends up mattering, which is almost hurtful for somebody that loves nuance and interest.
Yeah. It's also a massive sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? I've done it for this long. Shit. It's like, I'm going to carry on doing it that way, or have I wasted all my time? But when you kind of zoom out on it, you realize you've probably not wasted any time at all. You're probably where you, like, I'm not being philosophical, but you are where you should be. You've got as much results as you would have got doing it another way. If you just trained as hard, if you just used another drug, you're probably where you would have got to anyway. So you can kind of eliminate that fear of not making the progress that you think you could or should have done because you probably made it anyway.
The difficult thing with that is it's like the human condition. So if you are where you should be, but it's not where you want to be, your desire will cue an irrational decision to want to believe that there's a magic potion to edge you where you want to be. Let's say you've been taking 2,000 milligrams of anabolics for however long, and you look this way, and somebody says, well, have you tried this molecule? Because this one's 10 times as anabolic as what you're currently doing. You know that that's nonsense, because nobody has ever taken an androgen at matched milligrams and grown 10 times faster. And it sounds like I'm like making this bogus claim, but quite literally people say things like DHB is 5 times more anabolic than, or Trenbolone is a great example. Yeah. Trenbolone is 5 times more anabolic than testosterone. Okay, we approach it rationally. Has anybody ever taken Trenbolone and grown 5 times faster at the same milligrams?
I'll give it as someone would test.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. As someone on test, yeah, they have.
Yeah. Let's say at the same milligrams, 500 milligrams of test versus 500 milligrams of Trenbolone. Are you telling me that individual is going to grow 5 times more muscle? There's no working example of that ever happening. But you want to believe it because you're like, there it is.
Well, that's why we all fall prey to the secret. This is what the pros take. This is what this secret drug stack.
Yeah.
I had a funny example. I had a guy inquire.
It just causes health consequences.
For sure. Right. So I had a guy inquire for coaching, and he goes, what would I need to take to look like this guy? Sends me a picture of Chris Bumstead. And I was like, bro, I hate to tell you, there's no drug on this planet that's going to make you look like him. Build a time machine, go and change your parents, and you maybe got a chance. But people seem to think, what drug can I take? Or what's the thing I'm missing? You're like, nothing. It's the genetics. You're just, there's nothing that you aren't doing, assuming that you're following the majority of the things. There isn't some secret drug or protocol or something that you're not doing.
I'd say including the last, for example, 20 years of your lifetime, what you were doing.
Yeah, say you've been putting all your
Chris
time
Bumstead was clearly doing things to build muscle since he was a young teenager.
Oh yeah.
His pictures of him at 18 years old are fucking jacked out of his mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you pair those incredible genetics and relentless effort and adherence, and then you put in a drug stack design that's probably analogous to everybody else, if not less than everybody else, especially considering he's got, is it an autoimmune condition or something like that? And if you ever read some of the studies on anabolics or anything, training volume, and you head outside of just the abstract and you look at the statistical analysis, for example, and assess the biological individuality, which essentially just means how each individual is affected differently across the span of inputs that are being tracked. It's so wide that it would blow your mind. You see in the training volume studies quite frequently, it's like the conclusion might read that there's a dose response with volume and hypertrophy, which you know, that is what the research suggests, but there's an inverted U curve. It's a separate conversation. But there might be one individual in the study that actually lost muscle when he increased his volume. You know, similar with anabolics, if you read like the Basin paper, or there might be one guy, I haven't got the numbers off the top of my head, but let's say one guy adds 5 kilograms and one guy adds 500 grams body weight, and you're like, there really is such a vast inter-individuality between drugs, training, nervous system function, how that can potentiate
a great example. Have you ever seen Kev Levrone when he was off cycle versus on? You ever seen the pictures of him, Kevin Levrone?
I don't remember what they look like, but I have seen them in the past.
He looks like a normal, I don't want to say normal dude because he was obviously pretty jacked, but he would take like 6 months off a year.
Tour with his band.
Yeah, tour with his band. The guy would come back, look like he barely lifted, right? He would start training again and start pushing drugs, and within months he has blown up to get back on the O stage. And you just think no one else is responding like you are. If you look at a curve and you look at a sort of Gaussian distribution on a curve, like that's the mean and everyone's kind of, most people are around the average. He's the dude on the far right who is the hyper responder to training. He's doing 1 set per week and blowing up. He's the guy that takes 300 mg of test and he's blowing up.
Yeah.
And there's always one guy who's that super responder on that.
I think people seem to think Calvin Mager is like that too after his most recent comeback, because you know you saw that. Calvin Mager.
He certainly is a hyper responder. He's got amazing. I was talking to Rick Boundy about him the other day actually. Just such a cool physique, super dense, but with a nice flow as well. But yeah, certainly the hyper responder type. And in the age of the bodybuilding climate that we've got now, more people are doing this than ever. Therefore, more people are using PEDs than ever. You're gonna have. You've got more people that shouldn't be doing it. Not that I have any ethical stance on who does or who doesn't.
Right.
But I think it brings a wave of it's like loss. You know, I remember when I realized that I was never going to look like a super heavyweight bodybuilder, but up to that point it was the only thing that ever got me excited, ever lit me up. You know, bodybuilding was the only thing that I'd ever been really passionate about. And then I realized I actually can't ever look like a super heavyweight, and it does leave you with a grave loss. And I wonder how that's going to span across people now, in the way that biological individuality is so vast. It always has been, but less people would have gone into bodybuilding because they would have just been handpicked maybe in a gym. They were just training and they had amazing results. Someone said, well, you should try a bodybuilding show. Now you scroll in Instagram and see somebody that looks like a classic physique competitor most commonly and go, I want to look like that. But it's never coming. Not for everybody, but for many.
Real quick, guys. So while I was looking at the YouTube analytics, I actually saw that 85% of you guys that watch this channel are not subscribed. And I want to ask very little of you guys, but if you enjoy this podcast, if you find value in it, then please do me this one favor and subscribe to the channel, because doing so helps me get bigger and greater guests like the guests you are listening to today. Also, this channel is not sponsored, which means only the companies that I work with, which are Young LA and Huge Supplements, are the companies that can help fund this channel by you guys using the code NILE. So code NILE gives you a discount of 15% off of Young LA, and code NILE also gives you a discount of 10% off of Huge Supplements. And if you decide to purchase anything from any of these companies, it will help immensely for me by using my code. And this way, I can travel to other guests such as Dr. Mike Israetel next week, and also upgrade in equipment to make this podcast bigger and better for you guys. There's one thing that I wanted to argue, I kind of just wanted to insert that I think is really important that I haven't really valued as much as I do now, but in regards to how there's so much variance with how people respond, and then also how we were discussing how on Fawwad's podcast they were talking about 8 reps versus 30 reps. It seems in the studies it's about the same amount of hypertrophy. Obviously, I would guess from the studies this is your average person and they average out all the results, so this is basically stating like out of all these people it seems to be about the same amount of hypertrophy. But I got my genetic predispositions, or I did some DNA testing, and this stuff blew my mind because it kind of told me things that I already felt or I already kind of experimented with through my training and other things, but I wasn't sure. I was just like, that's how it feels. So maybe this is bro philosophy. Turns out I do have impaired muscle performance, which basically means that I respond better, or maybe I just have more type 1 fibers. So I respond better to higher endurance, longer time under tension, higher reps, potentially more volume. And I'm actually a little bit impaired when it comes to power, or I guess strength.
I wonder if you could have like biopsied yourself early training career to fiber composition, and then now when some degree of like fiber type switching has occurred, you're like, whoa, you know.
Joe and I were actually talking about this earlier, about the whole bro thing. And we're saying the more time we spent in the industry, the longer we've coached, the more kind of bro we think about things, because research is kind of a point on a map. It's going, might be the direction, right? So that could be drugs, volume, training, whatever. But you're the kind of experiment, and no one has done research on, let's say, volume. No one's taken high-level bodybuilders who've been training for 10 years and put them into a training study.
Over a long period of time. Which is a big problem with the volume study, yeah. So people are saying, this is what works for me. And as long as they've been diligent with it, and I'm sure you have, in terms of tracking your training, in terms of seeing the response, you've got a much better understanding, provided you're doing the intensity and all the other things, and you're tracking the variables. That is still data. That's still your N=1 research, but it's been led by the data. So the more we were talking, saying we've been in this search of optimal, right? We're saying, what's the optimal for this client? They probably know, if they've been training for a long period of time, to some degree, what is going to work for them. Now, that isn't to say you go, fuck the research, I'm not going to look at it. But how many times you say, I kind of knew that. I kind of knew that. And this opens the door, I think, to have a greater emphasis, as I have over the years with clients, on preference and enjoyment, because I think the frequency literature is a good comparison, and we've seen the trends move. I've watched bodybuilding be from when I started training. It's like, you train one body part every day. That's it. You know, the typical bro split. And I remember reading about the bodybuilders of the 40s, 50s, 60s, where they were coming to do one set per body part 3 days a week. So full body 3 days a week, you know, or, you know, when it's like, oh no, twice a week's better than once. So let's go with that. And then you saw the age of full body every day. And now we kind of get round to this point where we know it all comes out in the wash when stimulus and fatigue are accounted for. So what do you prefer doing? Just do that. And it's the same thing with PEDs. This thing could be more anabolic than this, when we know over the long term, the big mover is X milligrams over Y period of time, or stack design. What do you prefer? Because you feel best out of whatever milligram you require. And ultimately, it's just, with all of the data that we've got, we've come back to this thing of like, as long as you're ticking off these really basic inputs, you've got so much selection of which way you can choose to do. Just do that so that you can be high effort, high adherence, high consistency, you know?
Yeah, I think we obviously coach. We coach as our job, right? And the biggest thing isn't the programming, isn't the drug stack. It's, can this person enjoy it and do it for a long time? And again, I sound like a right bro, but you talk about Fuad and those guys, they probably fucking loved their training. They went in and they absolutely loved it. And because of that, their effort was great, their intensity was great, their adherence was great. Who gives a shit if they weren't doing it the most optimal way according to the latest research paper? They did it every day to a very high level. And that kind of holds a lot more weight than going, what's the reps in reserve of that? What drug stack were they using? And it obviously matters, but you kind of think hierarchy of importance. If you're doing it for a long time at a high level, you're going to be quite good.
Time wins, in my opinion, always. We were talking about like a little bit of a few horror stories, and you were also discussing how like you haven't seen ever, like, say 5 to 10 grams of someone taking ever substantial increase versus, or at least like a linear increase versus, say, like just 2 grams or 1 gram per week.
Yeah. And we know that from the data on pretty much any input that contributes towards hypertrophy is there's what we call an inverted U response. That's what we assume at the moment exists for trainer volume. We haven't found where that inverted U ends right now, but it makes sense it would tip off. But yeah, this is certainly the case with PEDs, where there's going to be a dose response, a positive dose response. Let's say from 0 milligrams, you escalate above that, anabolism is going to increase. Eventually, you're going to reach a milligram marker where it's going to level off, and then eventually you're going to reach a milligram marker that's going to start coming down, and you're going to have negative return on investment. And this would go for every different metabolic pathway that you would utilize, whether that be testosterone, growth hormone, insulin, an ARB, something that hits PPAR, whatever it is, there's going to be an inverted U. And this is where the art of stack design, we were talking about this earlier because we've got a seminar next month, and I was discussing the way that I want to present this on the board would be if we've got all these inverted U's, and this was sort of inspired by a video that Dr. Scott Stevenson did where he was panning out these dose responses, where we want to figure out how we can get to the peak of each dose response with each drug, or rather at least each one be on a solid incline, rather than crank a single vector at any one time. But yeah, we know for sure that it's going to tail off, because also there's a dose response relationship with side effects that's just going to be linearly positive and deleterious health outcomes. And it likely is those negative health costs that cause that trend down when oxidative stress is so high, or when side effects are so high, you can't sleep, you're lethargic, acne, whatever it may be. It could be all the way up to full kind of cardiac dysfunction. You're going to tail down for sure. So more absolutely is better. I can't say, I couldn't sit here and say less is more, because it's not factually true. Less isn't more. By definition, it's not more. But eventually more will start to cause a regression, like where Dr. Mike talks about exceeding your MRV. At that point, adaptations, although stimulus is increasing, adaptation is going to reduce.
It's like junk volume, but just with gear. And again, we have to look at the anecdote as well. Any bodybuilder who's pushed things, they'll say there's a point at which they just look worse. They went to say, oh, a gram, cool, look better, much bigger, fuller, training's great. 0.5 gram, 2 gram, 2.5, it starts to tip over, and now I'm looking worse. Now my sleep's shot, side effects are up, I feel like trash. And you often hear bodybuilders say, I felt toxic. They felt shit within themselves. That's a really good indication you've gone over that inverted U on the down end, and you're going to start having some side effects which you're getting no more growth benefit from.
Yeah, and to be a little bit practical about this, if anybody's sort of thinking, well, yeah, that's great, I know that eventually I'm going to get side effects and I can't do it anymore, but how much actually is that? Obviously, as we've mentioned, there's a ton of biological individuality, but over the years I've consulted and coached, because I only coach competitors, that's my whole client base, and I consult with a lot of competitors as well. For example, you've had Jared on here, lots of his clients I will consult regarding their PED stack design now and where they're going to move to over time. So I've experienced a ton of anecdotes, because the literature, unfortunately, and I don't think this will ever be the case, they're not trialing to see what is the most anabolic molecule with the least androgenicity in bodybuilder types for skeletal muscle hypertrophy at the dosages that we're using. You know, I'm pretty sure the Basin study is still the highest androgen dose that we've got in clinical study looking at hypertrophy specifically, and that was only up to 600 milligrams. But anyway, so to be practical, I would very rarely see a high-level competitor exceed 3 grams. It does happen, 3 grams a week.
Is that something you would more commonly see during prep?
It depends. It depends. I've got my opinions on when the highest androgen load would be most suitable. But yeah, in my experience, it will often be higher androgen load during prep, because it's almost like, and again, just to be clear, this isn't the way that I program, it's like the orals don't count. You know, they'll be on X amount of injectables, and then they'll add Anavar, and then Winstrol, and then Halo, and then Superdrol, and before you know it, you've got a gram of orals on top of the 2 grams that you were taking previously. So the total androgen load per week has escalated up, but it's normally at peak androgen load between 1.5 and 3 grams. And you get outliers either side. And I'm talking about sort of high-level competitor here.
Right.
You get the odd person that's cranking up to 4 or cranking up to 5. I've seen 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 grams, you know. But, I mean, we both know people that do that right now.
I've got a scary story for you.
That's insane.
So, do you know you guys are talking about Tren usage in yours with Mike and Jared?
Yeah.
We've both seen people use in prep 1.8 grams a week of Tren.
Yeah, well, there's a popular
people
app
we know,
in the UK where a competitor was logging
Like Ace.
on.
That's crazy.
Yeah, they were logging their drug use on the forum, and if I remember correctly, it was like 1.4 grams of Trembolo, 1.4 grams of Masteron,
5 grams total, yeah.
Primo, yeah.
And then orals on top of that. And there's like you say, there's a point at which you just look worse, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how someone would possibly feel on 1.8 grams a week of Tren.
Right. The reason I wanted to bring that up is because I had a Ziegler Monster on my podcast, and he had this really, I mean, his whole story is pretty awesome. He's experimented with a bunch of different variances. He's a very big guy. And he noticed for himself, whenever he was doing 1.2 grams versus doubling it to 2.4 grams, he literally noticed no difference in his progression. He still progressed the same.
Yeah.
Except that obviously 2.4 grams is going to cause him more health issues in the long run.
Yeah.
And then he stated that he knows over 24 guys that have all died from steroids because they were like bouncers backstage just injecting grams and grams and grams, megadoses until finally
It's
30,
really
40 years old, they're not around anymore.
It's a really scary world, man. And like Joe said, more does more, but more also hurts more as well. And that's one of the biggest things we push within our clients, the community, is just awareness of the risk. Because often with steroids, right, we're talking about side effects, people just like to say, steroids are stupid, don't take it. But like with recreational drugs, that doesn't work. Like, do you remember at school, people used to say, don't do drugs, kids. That didn't work, did it? People are just going to go and do it in private, and they're just going to do it without any knowledge or understanding. And that's when people get hurt. And you see the same with gear. People are just going to do it, and they're going to do it without any education, and they're going to do it without any knowledge of the side effects. And then people, unfortunately, get hurt. And we've seen it quite a lot. People get ill.
I've never personally experienced somebody dying directly from androgen use or anything like that.
There's a few people in the UK recently.
Yeah, but confounding variables. I'm talking about absolutely this was caused by so. And it's difficult because it's an accumulating thing, you know. If your ejection fraction is dropping over time, you know, LVH is creeping up in you, whatever. But oftentimes bodybuilders also use recreational drugs, stimulant use. Opiates is huge in the bodybuilding world. You know, which one did what? It was probably a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of effect.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to the education thing, it's important to present in absence of ideology. You know, the way that I've always tried to be is just lay out evidence as it exists now, or personal anecdote, but without any, I think you should do this, or I use TRT, so I think everyone should only be on TRT. It's more like, this is what the evidence says, and there's a personal ethical decision to be made. Like at our seminar last year, we went through a personal needs analysis and how you would collate that data and use that to make decisions about your PED use moving forward. It's not about, I think people should use less or should use more. I think it's about, let's be rational and objective. Here's the desired end result. Firstly, can I actually get there? Because if my desired end result is to be Ronnie Coleman, I'm the wrong race in the first place. And then, you know, there's no amount of drug, you like that one, there's no amount of drug that will ever get me there. So automatically it's off. But then how do we approach the stepwise process? And what's your risk in absence of anything else?
Risk is the biggest thing we focus on. Joe, I'm going to use my.
Well, I focus more on reward.
Joe deals with purely competitors, and I deal more on the. So I coach mainly coaches, and I deal a lot on the health side. So like risk management, I call it. And I'm going to use my sports car analogy, Joe, which Joe fucking hates this one.
Just heard it.
So I always think if you want to drive a sports car and you want to go fast as fuck, it's best if you know you can drive well. You've got your seatbelt on, you've got the tyres checked, brakes checked, you know what you're doing. It's exactly the same for gear. If you know what you're doing, you know how to inject, you know how to look after yourself, you know the side effects, you've got your risk management in place, you know what, like, for example, you're taking an ARB, you're taking antioxidants, you know the risks of what you're using. Go as fast as you fucking want, right? But as long as you know what you're doing, you know
hopefully
the
he's continuing to check.
Yeah,
checkups.
and hopefully continue to check.
Checkups.
But there's always going to be people that don't give a fuck. They just want to go fast.
Right.
We're not saying you're good or bad because of that, because there's always someone who's going to be a bit reckless because they just love it. Mm-hmm. We're not sat there going idiot. We're going as long as you're happy and you know the risks. You crack on.
Yeah.
The only issue I find with this is that it's not just the people that maybe choose to be ignorant or choose to go fast without knowing anything, but you also don't know what you don't know. And so there's a lot of people there who don't even know what they should know in order to move forward, such as like ARBs, your angiotensin receptor blockers, your other medications, as well as not just doing your blood work, but like, organ imaging. Like no one really thinks about no one really talks about organ imaging that much.
Yeah.
Unless you're in the very high level bodybuilding.
We put a lot of time into producing a lot of content on echocardiograms and calcium score tests and whatnot, which is still pretty rare. Luckily, they're now pretty available in the UK. They didn't used to be. But yeah, just to press that point, it's not a conversation about ethics or morals or values. It's just objective, rational descriptions of evidence. That's what we need to really take home, and then the individual can choose what to do with the information. Because you rightfully said, like, people don't know what to do. It's very true. When we were in one of our first business meetings with a team of marketers when we first started Physique Collective, they said to us, before we start developing and marketing this app, who is this for? And what immediately came to my mind was, this app is for me 10 years ago, because I really wanted to know, I like many others, I was obsessed with not PEDs, anything that contributes towards physique development. It was like a sickness to me. And I spent so long learning how to read research, spending tons of money on consultations with some great educators that I still learn from today. Sleepless nights, quite literally. That sounds like an extreme, but I remember the first time I found a study on high-dose growth hormone and the difference between lean body mass accrual and actual skeletal muscle hypertrophy. Up to that point, I thought that growth hormone was directly in and of itself, in absence of any other molecules, anabolic to skeletal muscle. And this study like blew my world apart. And I remember me and my wife were taking my little sister to the zoo the next day, and I could not sleep the whole night because that was running through my mind. And had to have a nap under the tree next to the monkey thing. Anyway, my point was that I had to work so hard, and this isn't like a woe is me, but I had to work so hard, so long, spend so much money to learn things that other people may not be inclined to do. And I don't think that you should have to do that. Whereas if Physique Collective was around when I was that age, and I could have paid less than £10 to search any of these things that somebody's managed to pass through in a research paper, I would be so pleased. So that was our thing, like, give people nothing but the ability to make their own decisions on what they're going to do based on accurate data.
So good that you're having these conversations as well, because you say people don't know what they don't know, right? So you've got us on one side trying to get that information out there, and I've actually got a cool So I'm part of a research study at one of the universities in the UK, and it's with a cardiac specialist. So it's a long-term study for basically steroids' effect on the heart, and it's probably the only real long-term study that's been done in the world. And I'm getting quite friendly with the researchers, and we're seeing more and more and more data about the effect that gear has on the heart. And being the fact that we're close, we can then put that information out there so more people can see it. We can speak to people like you who've got a bigger platform, who we can sort of help people stay healthier. Overall, it's a massive win. Like it's pretty cool that we can
I'm glad you use the word healthier, because that's a huge thing to press to anybody that's getting into PEDs or even just bodybuilding in general. With social media the way that it is now, and there's a lot more PED educators than there's ever been, you'll see words like safe thrown around or something like that. There is no way to do this safely.
Yeah.
There is no safe, there's no risk-free. All of it is going to be damaging. The magnitude of the damage is what we're trying to control.
Right. Something that I like Vigorous Steve saying on my podcast was like, can't do safe, but at least you can do it responsibly,
right?
To
Absolutely.
a degree. So,
yeah,
you know, as much risk mitigation as possible.
Completely.
So, that's honestly, I appreciate you saying that, because like one of the biggest reasons why I started this podcast, obviously, I also love just talking to people about stories, and even people that don't even use PEDs. But one of the, I think one of my mottos and one of the things that I felt like was my purpose in life is after I like kind of opened up on like YouTube and like told people about my whole like PED use story and how it like affected me negatively and everything. Ever since then, I've had countless kids coming up to me like in person saying like, this, my friend told me to start steroids, or my friend told me to start MK because he's making hella gains and the only side effect that he feels is hunger, which is crazy. And just also countless kids asking me if they should start steroids, and many of times it's because they see like a lot of glorification on TikTok. Like there's this one kid, I don't really want to put him on blast, but like Greg Doucette made a bunch of videos on this kid recently because he's posting transformations of himself where he's like really small, and then he injects himself with a needle, and then he shows a video of him being fucking yoked out of his mind, and just posting that as if it's literally just I did this, I took steroids, and now I look fucking sick. And sorry to cut you off there, but yeah, the value, the assessment of values in content creators is one that we're in a tricky situation now. So the value of that individual accruing fame and wealth over the correct ethical or moral move, which is to not inspire young people to abuse drugs at a younger age. But the only way I think out of that is to dilute it with more people like you. So you can come and bring accurate education that's compelling, presented really well. Maybe one kid out of every 3 is going to see that and capture that. Think about that extrapolated over a lifetime. It may stop them making the decision that would have led them down a series of bad decisions, you know?
It's just scary to think that kid, I don't know who it is, but I can almost guarantee when he's 30, 35, he'll have a very, very different viewpoint on the behaviors that he's doing now. Because I imagine he's a young kid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I assume so.
He'll be doing that 30, 35. If he's hurt himself, which the likelihood is he may well have done, he'll be one of the guys being like, guys, don't do what I did. But right now, it's kind of, you can only see what's in front of your face, and you think, I can be famous, I can do all this cool stuff. At what cost? And we see a lot of people who may have been in a similar boat. They sort of go, fuck it, I want to be a pro, I'll do whatever it takes. If I die, I die. Like, and we've both had a very reckless approach when we were younger to this sort of stuff. And as we got older, we think
we all have.
Yeah, absolutely. Right?
Everybody has to have that. It's almost a hero's journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like an archetypal story in many ways. But things, I mean, and this is not going to mean anything to anybody younger than us, but things do change when you age. You know, like when I met my wife, and then eventually we get married, and then we've got a house.
We sound old as fuck now, Joe.
You get to this point now, like I'm on a fertility protocol now, and the guilt that comes along with that, knowing that we're trying for children and I can't do it because of my decisions that were nihilistic, is pretty haunting, you know. Not to say that I regret anything as such, and I think everybody will have this, but knowing what I know now, I would have done things incredibly differently. You know, so hopefully, and that's not me saying, no, what I know now, I just would have never taken steroids. Well, no, of course I would have. I still would have done what I thought was going to give me the best chance of being the most muscular person ever. I never even got close. But that model looks so different to what I actually did. And I can guarantee that at the very least, I would have got just as far, if not further. Luckily, I never had any negative health ramifications. I also never had any gains, so maybe that balances out. But in a way, that would have been far less impactful on my physique, on my psychology, on my relationships, you know.
I think it's important to say you're seeing almost like a backlash about bodybuilding, and we're certainly not doing that. Especially in the UK, there's certain groups and they're saying bodybuilding hurt me. It's like, no, bodybuilding didn't hurt you. You hurt yourself. And we love bodybuilding, and all our clients love bodybuilding, and everyone loves getting jacked. We're absolutely not saying don't do that. We're just saying, look, there might be a safer way to do this that you're not going to then regret down the line. And again, just once again, I'll just say props to you for putting that message out there, because it's probably not easy to be the guy being like, think about what you're doing, guys. People are like, fuck off. And you're like, well, just maybe listen to me, right? So it would be easier for you to be like, yeah, fuck it, take loads of Tren, because it probably gets more clicks.
More views on your podcast.
Yeah. But
at what cost?
At what cost? And yeah, it's good. I mean, we're in that mentality of you put out the right message, do the right thing, and hopefully, like you say, you'll have kids come up to you saying, you helped me.
So I'm curious what y'all's input is, and obviously if it's different than what I feel, then that's obviously fine, you know, it happens. And maybe it's better that way, so then it seems this is very unbiased. But since I'm having a lot of these kids come up to me and asking about what they do, and like they want to take steroids and like what should they do, and obviously I just tell them what I feel, you know. Most of the time it's like you don't even know what an AI is, so I don't think it's the smartest decision. I don't think you should. But I've noticed that there's also, I've had stories, and I've been told of a lot of these younger audience, and a lot of these kids who obviously want to become creators and bodybuilders, and you know, they create content around them building their physique, but they like do really high dosages already. They just started steroids and they're doing like over a gram already, you know, with like the compounds they're adding on. Personally, from my experience, I feel like when I started was most definitely the time for me to start at the smallest dose, clearly. And I responded the most by far. Something I've noticed too is like now years later, I seem to respond to much higher doses with almost seemingly
lower side effects.
Yeah, just the lowest, especially emotionally and mentally, compared to when I was younger. And when I was younger, I think I honestly incurred a lot of like mental issues on myself while I was experimenting with the first PEDs I was taking. So I wanted to know you guys' thoughts on that.
I've got two kind of views on this. So I've got my personal opinion. I completely agree with you. I think wait until you are sufficiently educated and mature enough and have all your ducks in a row, so you can train properly, you know how to eat, you know how to sleep, you are mentally acute or agile enough to deal with the side effects or potential side effects, the disturbances. That's what I think you should do. The problem you've got when you're speaking to kids is if you in any way make them feel like you're telling them what to do. For a lot of kids, they're going to be like, fuck you, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's a really difficult conversation because you want to be like, look, what you really want to do is educate yourself, but you don't want to distance yourself from them. You want to be able to educate them without estranging them. And that's a hard thing to do. It's a really hard balance because, like I said earlier, if you act like their mum and just say you shouldn't do drugs, they're going to run off. They're going to find a way to do it. They're going to take SARMs. They're going to take these drugs. They're going to take them in one way, shape or form, and you're not going to know about it. So our approach has always been educate and try and lead them down the right decision, which is to delay this thing or to not do it. And if they are going to do it, at least they can do it better than what they would have done. That's my personal opinion anyway.
Yeah, so the context of the question is we've got this individual who is young. So what are we saying, sort of 18 to 21? Younger, maybe?
Sometimes younger.
Could be younger, okay.
I've had younger than 18 come up to me and starting.
Firstly, we'd want to assess their goal long term. So maybe they want to be a professional bodybuilder, easy goal. Look at the average age of the most successful professional bodybuilders, north of 30, sometimes late 20s. Mr. Olympia's practically all north of 30, aren't they?
Yeah, 35.
So when we look at that, we say, okay, like we said, more drugs does more. If this young person takes a gram the first time they take anabolics, without question, they will grow faster than if they took less. Of course, they will progress faster. But here's the catch. 12 weeks of progression. What we need is 12 years of progression. So how do we replicate as many progressive weeks, months, years together in a solid line so that you can actually arrive there alive, firstly. You don't cook yourself in the process. And it's just more likely for you to also be able to exit afterwards, because no matter what anybody believes in this moment, you will want to do something after bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And that model would look very different, even if we said, forget about risk. Doesn't matter. I don't care. That's fine. Let's go with that if that's their approach. If they actually want to achieve the goal, they won't be able to sustain a high androgen load for that long before there will be an accumulation of vectors that inhibit their future progression.
Yep.
Training volume, for example. A lot of these studies, very acute time periods, and we see an improvement in hypertrophy with much higher training volumes. Well, let's compare a volume like that where you can only train for 3 weeks before fatigue has accumulated to a magnitude that you need a full week off. Now, a quarter of the time, let's say 3 weeks on, 1 week off, you just have to do that because you're blasted and you overreach constantly. Okay, so now a quarter of the year, you're not in the gym. Similarly, let's say you crank the androgen dose so aggressively that these issues creep upon you, and now you need to drop down to whatever dose needed to correct for those issues. I'm not even talking about health. It could just be extracellular fluid retention or gyno or lack of sleep from this kind of androgen-mediated neurotoxicity issue, whatever it may be. Okay, now you need longer time at a lower dose before you can get back to here, and you net that total drug exposure over that 12 years, you'd be much more suited to going the requirement to progress at the desired rate now. When we've run out of room of that, maybe you move to the next requirement. Might be another 100 milligram. When you run out of time on that, you move to the next requirement, like progressive overload in the gym. Mm-hmm. The specific adaptation to imposed demand principle, the SAID principle, the specific adaptation of skeletal muscle hypertrophy to the imposed demand of adding load or reps per set, or using more total milligrams of androgens, mm-hmm. or increasing the dose of growth hormone, or eating more food. It has to be that way for you to be able to execute it over the period of time that allows you to even get to the goal in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So you guys, if you don't mind me asking, what did like your personal, journey look like when you started around maybe the age of 19, 20? And then do you feel like you encountered any, horror stories for yourself or like side effects that now, obviously going back, you would have done something differently back when you were younger?
I did a cycle when I was, like I said at the start, 19 or 20. I did about a 16-week, started at 500 milligram a week of test, and I did that for 12 weeks, and it was great, but I blew up like a water buffalo. Was taking AIs, everything. Wasn't really, I liked to put on loads of size, but I had no idea what I was doing. Just literally came off, did a PCT, old school PCT. I think I might have done one more. It's a bit hazy. And then I just stopped. I didn't do anything. So I maybe did 2 cycles until I was 28. And when I was 28, I went on TRT. I was, actually at the time, I was misdiagnosed to go on TRT, but I was like, fuck it, TRT we are. And when you're prescribed it, it's like a rabbit hole. I was like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. So I started taking a little bit more, and then me and Joe started working together, and I was like, fuck it, let's go. So I think the highest we ever pushed things up to was 2.5 grams a week.
And to be fair to Matt, you were what, 260 or
272 at my heaviest.
Yeah, with abs, you know.
Yeah.
He was a...
I'm 6'3", so it's a slight cheat code, but yeah, I was about 30 pounds or like heavier than I am now. And it was fucking great, man, to be honest. But I'm not a competitive bodybuilder, had no desire whatsoever to step on stage. I just loved it for the training, the journey, or any cliche. I just loved it for all that. But my sleep went to shit. Sleep apnea, tired all the time, lethargic. And I'm not saying I would ever change it because I fucking loved it, right? I really fucking loved it. But for my goals, and my goal is build Physique Collective, have a great coaching business, have a great life. I love to travel, do all those sorts of things. It doesn't really align with that. And for me, it was kind of I pushed it hard for a few years, and now I'm back running. People call it sports TRT. Essentially, I float around 400 to 500 milligram per week all the time, and just try and stay as healthy as I can whilst knocking around like 245 pounds is usually where I sit. And I feel great. I feel fucking amazing now. Like I was obviously a lot bigger, and you look back at pictures and you're like, shit, man, I was much more jacked than I am now. But I'm 36. I'm 40 in 3.5 years. Where am I going to go from there? Sort of thing. It's like, this is sustainable for me. I feel good. I'm healthy, and yeah. So my journey is definitely not a very exciting one, but I'm that old guy. I used to be big. I used to be bigger. But yeah, I've definitely not done it for that long. But all my health markers are in a good place. I'm healthy, and I will probably sort of stay around this level until I get a bit older, then taper down to a true TRT whenever the time's right. If like Joe, I ever meet someone and want to have kids, maybe that. But yeah, it's definitely. I don't regret a thing. I don't regret a single. And this is not me sort of endorsing anything. I actually wish I started sooner, because it would have been fun to have like a longer run at that journey.
Sooner, as in like when you actually started
pushing up gear, because I did 2 cycles early, and I sort of disregard them as I wasn't really doing anything.
Right.
I wish when I was like 28, maybe if I started when I was 25 with the knowledge I had now. But I think had I done it with the knowledge I had then, I probably would have done a lot more damage to myself. So I'm kind of very glad how it all played out, really.
I feel like that's also kind of at least a sensible place to start, even when you were younger. I think I've heard horror stories of people that are just starting on over a gram immediately.
Yeah.
And obviously all the side effects and all the detrimental mental issues, changes of personality.
For sure.
Then obviously no sleep, which further changes your personality, ruins your relationships, etc. So
so my personal story, journey, whatever you want to call it, with PEDs, like I say, I think I was about 19 or 20, and I'm 30 now, so a decade. I'd done as much research as I possibly could by that point. I was well aware of how the HPG axis worked, and that there'd be negative feedback inhibition, and I decided by that point that cycling steroids was not the appropriate way to use these drugs.
As in like PCTing off and then back on. Yeah.
So I decided this is me now for my life. I'm going to go on these, and this is what I'm going to do. So I started with a recommendation of somebody in the gym, not what I would recommend now. I think it was either 500 or 600 milligrams of testosterone, you know, a mil Monday, a mil Thursday, and then this Egyptian Dianabol. Funny story, actually, that, and this is pretty mean because this was a friend. I got my blood work done 8 weeks into it. And luckily at that time, I'd learned enough to know that this was an important thing to do. And my test was like just above the physiological range. So I'd essentially been sold fake gear.
Oh shit!
By a friend at the gym. He might have not known it was fake, you know.
Just sold you olive oil.
Well, there was test in it. Like my LH and FSH was gone.
Yeah, but heavily diluted.
It was probably analogous to dosing maybe 200 milligrams a week at the top end, you know. But what I was very aware of already then is I started training when I was sort of 15-ish, and I'd fallen in love with bodybuilding by the time I was 16. You know, this was the most exciting, beautiful, incredible thing that I'd ever seen. Probably the first time in my life that I'd felt lit up by something. You know, it's all I would think about. And like I said, I became so deeply obsessed with the history of the sport, exactly what's going on, nutrition practices, whatever. So I was training with two lads at the time, Ryan and Jake. And we did the same programming, same sets, everything. We all gave the same effort. We were all following the same nutrition plan. Funnily enough, even back then, they had asked me to do all of that for them because they knew how deeply entrenched I was in it. And they grew at levels far above me. So I knew from early on that despite any effort or adherence, this wasn't for me. But there was something that came with that. It was, and this will sound a bit arrogant, but I don't mean it sounds that way. It was like one of the only things I'd ever applied myself to in my life that I wasn't automatically very good at. You know, I played the guitar through my whole life. My dad was a guitarist. I started playing the guitar when I was so young, but I never practiced. I never gave it any effort. But I got my grade 8, which in the UK is like the highest grade you can get, when I was 9, and I left school to be paid to play session gigs just because I was good. Damn. And it was no effort for me. But it also never excited me because of that. There was something so, you know, like when you're in a bad relationship with somebody, those people, but they can't stop coming back. It was like that. Like, the more I hated it, the more I couldn't stop doing it. And it was the same with anabolics. It was the same with PEDs. Like, I knew that my response was so poor because after that time, sorry, I've gone off on a real tangent here, but after that time, I got my hands on some real anabolics, luckily, online. And this was back when everything was forums and it was a little bit more difficult to acquire than it is these days. And I knew that it was real because I HPLC tested it. I paid for HPLC testing from Janashik back in the day when I was frequenting professional muscle. He's still going, and I'd recommend HPLC testing if people want to test the efficacy of their substances. But now I'm using real stuff and I'm making improvements, but it's not very good, you know. And then over time I was doing a little bit more, and my dosing ended up sort of in the 1 to 2 gram range.
How many years passed by before that happened?
So I met my now wife when I was maybe 22. And by the time I'd moved in with her, I mean, this is a whole separate story, but I ended up having to move in with her mum because I was dead broke trying to start online coaching. But it was so sparse back then. Like, there wasn't really any coaches. It was like Dante Trudell, Skip Hill. I met Austin Stout, and like, I remember my wife saying to me, "You should think about getting Instagram." You know, that's how long ago this was. But anyway, so it was at that time that I started to exceed. I remember, actually, I can remember, there was, so I'd been doing cycles of 500 milligrams of test, and then I did 750, and I was still blasting and cruising here. I would do like 14 weeks on, and then I would do like 16 weeks at TRT, true TRT. And I remember this first cycle that I really pushed it. I did 800 test, 400 deca. So now I'm north of a gram. Not a lot happened. You know what? I've made progress, and I'm sure somebody's listening to this thinking, he probably doesn't train hard enough. You know, he doesn't nail his food or whatever it may be.
I can jump in. I can definitely vouch that Joe does train fucking hard, and he is obsessed with nailing it down. So
glad you're here, bro.
Yeah, I'll back you up.
So I was making progress, but not great. And then there was another forum that came out. It was a private board ran by Chester Rockwell. That's a name nobody would have heard these days, but one of the best PED educators to have ever lived. Anonymous. You can probably find some of his articles still online, but that forum was incredible, and sort of part of the inspiration for Physique Collective came from there. But now I was on a private forum with guys that were really doing this. Competitors, big super heavyweight bodybuilders, and I'm seeing 2 gram, 3 gram, 4 gram, you know, and I think, right, I'm all in on this. I don't care about anything else. I'm going to do this. So I started trying out the 1.5, the 2 grams. I don't know the most I ever took. I don't know. I have done 2 grams of tests before. I did 2 grams of tests with 500 milligrams of Primo for one cycle. And the biggest I ever got in weight was 260 pounds. In good condition, not great, you know, like good off-season condition, abs, good separation, was 245 to 247. So a lot bigger than I am now. For context, I'm like 205 on a good day these days. But I never looked like a bodybuilder. Never. It wasn't there for me. And it was really, really psychologically draining for me to have this thing bearing over me. Like, I've only wanted one thing. I only wanted to be a super heavyweight, and I can give it everything. But how do I grasp the fact that it's never going to happen? And I couldn't believe that because I really wanted to get there. But the reality is, like, it's so haunting to have something that you're so desperate for, but no level of hard work or investment will ever get you there. Everyone can progress and improve, but not everyone can get there. But I tried my hardest for a long time. Anyway, all of this to say, a few years ago I sort of shifted things around to being a lot more moderate. You know, I'm a bit older now, got successful business, I got married in this time, you know, I've got dependents, so I sort of scaled back. I would exist sort of in the 400, 500 milligram most of the time, and then maybe now and again we go up to 800 to, I'd accumulate maybe 100 milligram every couple of weeks up to 1500 and then come back. And then these days is just 150 milligrams of test a week. And I've just in the last few months started HCG. Got HMG waiting for me when I got back, because I just had my most recent fertility results. So when I went and got my fertility done, the first test, I had 0 count, 0 sperm count.
Damn.
0 motility.
0.
Yeah, they couldn't measure the morphology.
Yeah.
There was nothing traceable.
Insanity. And then now what?
So I'm about 12 weeks later, and I think Matt knows a lot more about the fertility side of things than me, but 12 weeks later, apparently is 12 weeks for a full kind of, is it cyclical regeneration of sperm or something? So I'm only just seeing now the start of what this protocol is going to do. And I was up to like 9 total count with 1 mobile. At least I've gone somewhere.
You need one. You only need one.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time. You know?
HCG is amazing though.
Yeah.
Fucking works those loads, bro.
HMG is the GOAT for this.
Oh yeah, HMG is
HMG is the one. Like Joe, I've no doubt Joe will be fine. I think the fertility stuff with gear is largely overrated. in terms of the negative impact.
I think so. I think so too.
Yeah.
I have a story about that.
Yeah, if you didn't have issues prior to exogenous androgen use, you'll be fine. And on Physique Collective, we've got quite a lot of successful fertility stories that we've been able to drive through the fertility protocols that we've put out. It feels like everyone sits there and goes, well, I've got loads of clients that have done this and this.
We actually do.
Yeah, I wouldn't say loads. I've got like 6 people that were clients that were competitors that have used our fertility protocols,
like HCG and HMG.
Yeah, along with diet, supplementation. There's quite a lot of moving parts, but honestly, the biggest ones, HMG, HCG, don't be in a deficit. Like, there's other things you can use, like injectable L-carnitine, that sort of stuff. But for the most part, those 2 drugs, you're probably going to be okay, as long as you're not like banging in ton of exogenous tests, like 125, 150. As long as you're not trying to be like full blast, and then this HCG will fix me. Like,
I've only had one case where I've had to take people off of exogenous androgens entirely. We've been able to move fertility to an appreciable level, at least a sufficient level, through keeping the TRT and not having to remove the exogenous androgen. I prefer to run a stepwise approach to limit the negative psychological impact, you could say, of doing this. So, we would measure count at beginning, and then we would introduce a low dose of HCG, retest. If that's not sufficient, maybe we'd add this dose of HMG in, retest. Maybe we'd need to move up the HCG now. We go, it's not right, come off everything and go on a power PCT protocol or something.
So this is just a story. So obviously this differs per person, but it's kind of a cool and interesting story. But I have a very close friend that like had issues with pornography when he was younger. And obviously this causes issues with his sex life. And as he grew older, also, he always never really had much load, I guess. And, started steroids, and honestly, like, basically didn't have any loads whatsoever. He didn't get his, he never got his fertility checked, but had like a consistent big fear over just not having kids. So I think something in the plan was like, I'm trying to free sperm just in case. But then Vigorous Steve suggested, I actually worked with, I'm working with Transcend now, and also had consultations with Merck Health, and both have recommended me like cycles of HCG, say for example 3 months on, 5 months off, even while on like a PED cycle or bodybuilding cycle. And in a discussion I had with Vigorous Steve, he actually even suggested, honestly, just take HCG around while you're running your PED cycles, because if you want to have kids, then it's important. And told this guy, started running HCG during his PED cycles, and he accidentally got someone pregnant. Yeah. So
it works.
Yeah, it's crazy how much it works.
Well, there's people, I mean, there's lots of bodybuilders that have kids, right? And but like one of the Physique Collective athletes, Leon Pierce, incredible classic competitor, he got his wife pregnant on north of 2 grams of anabolics in like a prep.
No,
so
shit.
Some of us have got the superhuman sperm, I guess.
It can work.
Yeah.
HCG is a funny one where people just go, I probably can't think of many drugs in bodybuilding where people are so either end of the spectrum, don't fucking take it while you're running cycle. People are like, don't stop taking it. It's quite a funny one to me. I always think, do what you want. That we haven't got enough data to say one or the other is the right way to do. I think take it if you need it. I don't take it. You didn't take it, but it works, and it'll work when you need it. If you want to take it all the time, take it all the time.
Yeah, it's likely if you want to preserve fertility and you're running longer durations of TRT, that having some degree of LH signaling and some degree of intratesticular testosterone, you are, of course, going to maintain a higher level of spermatogenesis. We don't have good data on if Leydig cell desensitization occurs with longer durations of androgen use. We could maybe assume that. We don't know what net effect on spermatogenesis is going to occur as you accumulate up higher milligrams or whatnot. But there's likely not, and I'm not going to say definitely not, a downside of consistently running, maybe we'll say the 250 to 500 units 2 to 3 days a week or something like that. I would fear that excessively dosing HCG over long periods of time could potentially lead to Leydig cell desensitization.
There's only one study to show that, and it's in rats. So we're talking like people are extrapolating it. But the way I kind of think about it, and I wouldn't say this is a very scientific way, do you know like a circuit board? Is if the circuit board, if it's flipping down and you're constantly trying to force one switch up, imagine you're shutting everything down with exogenous hormones and you're constantly trying to flip the circuit breaker up, but the entire fuse is blown, it won't work. So if you're using a moderate dose of HCG, you're probably going to be all right. If you're just, like say, jamming in a very high dose, and some people are running like 1500 IU a week, you know, maybe don't do that. Like, maybe slow it down a little bit.
Yeah. In fact, I'll drop this in here for anybody that's interested in fertility. I shared a breakdown of a study on Physique Collective the other day on black seed oil, which is just an over-the-counter supplement. People often use it as an antimicrobial. People actually often use it as a nootropic, funnily enough. Study in men using 5 ml per day of black seed oil. Why this study was interesting to me was that these were men with abnormal sperm count, morphology and whatnot. You know, they fit the they almost allocate directly to bodybuilder types because that's what we have, and they had some seriously robust increases in spermatogenesis, total count, morphology. All of these things improved with something that's cheap, safe and over the counter. So anybody who's looking to crank it in, that's an easy way to get a good win alongside like injectable L-carnitine. There's quite literally no deleterious health costs of these, and they're going to improve your chances.
If you feel like any of the medications that we spoke about today may benefit you, such as BPC 157, GH secretagogues such as Tesamorelin, IGF-1, oxandrolone troche, semaglutide, then you can obtain these from Transcend HRT, and the link for that will be in the bio. If you feel like you're experiencing symptoms of low testosterone, such as depression, anxiety, lack of motivation, as well as lack of sex drive, then you can get this checked out as well by getting your blood work done at Transcend, and they will provide you expert medical analysis. Transcend HRT has worked with many professional bodybuilders and pro athletes, such as Thor Bjornsson, Phil Heath, and Jeremy Buendia. And if you feel like this podcast has any relevancy to you, I do believe that this clinic will provide of great benefit to you as well. I guess Fawad did his first podcast with Sim Solik. They forgot to turn on the...
Oh man. I've done that
so it's just video audio the entire
time. I've done
time.
that on OPD before, where we've recorded a whole podcast. Do you know what? I can't remember who it was. We had a guest on, and it got to the end of the Zoom, and I realised I'd forgot to press record. I felt terrible. We had to redo it.
So I wanted to start with something that's not bodybuilding, because I saw it on your page and it was kind of got me a little curious. But I was wanting to discuss cognitive decline from aging or using steroids.
Yeah.
I know you were stating that it seems to be correlated with glutamate and GABA potentially.
I think
two things, but you
well, I wouldn't want to say that. You know, what we know right now with the state of the evidence that there is neurotoxicity associated with all androgen use. Supraphysiological levels of any anabolic androgenic steroid, from testosterone to nandrolone to trembolone to whatever, they're all neurotoxic. It does seem to be the case that steroidal progestins like trembolone or like nandrolone are comparatively, on a milligram to milligram basis, more neurotoxic than other molecules. And it does appear to be the fact that Dianobol's unique conversion to methyl estrogen appears to be more neurotoxic, which is interesting because estradiol itself is neuroprotective. Yeah, and there is some research to suggest that growth hormone also attenuates some of the neurotoxic impacts of androgens. And from what we can parse apart in the research thus far, where we're looking at like cell line data, we're not looking at long-term human models, that there's likely a degree of, I don't want to say glutamate excitotoxicity because that would be a bit extreme. You see that in cases of like benzodiazepine withdrawal, for example, or extreme GABA receptor downregulation or desensitization. But there is at least a shift that seems to occur with androgen use where they would have a higher baseline glutamate and a lower baseline GABA that could be contributing. We also know there's some dopaminergic interactions there as well. The truth of the matter is we don't yet know the exact mechanism responsible. I think that's more frightening than knowing. And I think with the way the data's going, we're going to be far more compelled to include a prophylactic protocol, we could say. Similarly, you know, it's very commonplace to use an angiotensin receptor blocker now to attenuate some of the angiotensin 2 mediated cardiac issues, or something like metformin to combat excessive oxidative stress. I think it's going to be more compelling over time for us to want to maybe include things that scavenge glutamate or have upregulatory impacts on GABA, or something that upregulates tyrosine hydroxylase, so something that's going to contribute towards dopamine receptor upregulation, or sensitivity or something like that. Yeah.
We do also know that increased oxidative stress is likely a component as well, on top of what Joe said. And that is something we know is going to increase with anabolic use. We can't necessarily quench all of that, but we can put some things in place, which most bodybuilders are probably already doing. So,
Right, like-
increase antioxidants.
Like, would you recommend like injectable glutathione or GHU?
Yeah, so glutathione. We've got metformin that Joe mentioned. We've got a whole host of various antioxidants we can use. Obviously, making sure we're getting enough fruit and veg in our diet, which for some reason a lot of bodybuilders don't. So again, just doing the basic shit and also making sure you're getting sufficient sleep will help mitigate that to a large degree. But we can't sit here and say, oh yeah, just take these supplements, it's going to offset all this other stuff.
Right.
But that certainly will be a contributing factor to cognitive decline over time as well, which we can try and manage.
I think the lifestyle factors are always most important, obviously, and they're the ones that definitely make the biggest impact. But I think people just kind of like to hear the easy key, like additional factor, because they feel like they already know that.
Yeah, well, this is what I was going to say. Like, when Matt says something like eat more fruit and veg, it sounds like almost such a, well, yeah, duh. But if we consider what the typical bodybuilding diet is, you know, we were literally talking earlier today, we were looking at somebody's full day of eating, they didn't eat a single vegetable, and you see the research on up to, is it 700 grams of combined fruit and veg a day is this kind of upper limit of what individuals would maybe satisfy the positive health outcome. We have to pay mind to the fact that bodybuilders are going to have higher baseline levels of systemic inflammation, higher baseline levels of oxidative stress. So it stands to reason that our dietary antioxidant intake should be higher. Matt mentions antioxidants. You look at an antioxidant like N-acetylcysteine, NAC, we know that that has regulatory effects on glutamate. So again, you could push that. It could be via that mechanism. I'm not sure. And then there's other things like agmatine sulfate. That's quite a mild NMDA receptor antagonist. Glutamate quenching, lithium orotate, not lithium carbonate and not lithium in high dosages. But again, if we're looking at supporting supplementation, that works well. The patented form of Magnolia Biolite Relora, again, has good human data to show that it has some solid impacts on reducing Alzheimer's and dementia risk. And then, you know, maybe further down the line, looking at some of these more niche peptides like Semax or Salank. You know, if you can translate some of the Russian data, they're very interesting, specific to the neurological impacts of androgen use. But we're very early days on this. We've got a thread on the forum that I started called the Research Review. Is it called Research Review and something thread? I should know.
I think it's Research and Review thread.
No, it's not that. Anyway.
We both don't know what our own website is.
So I started a thread on the forum where basically, because I read, you know, my learning practice every day, I'll go through studies, and every time I find one that I think is of good quality and has some practical take-home points in it, it's not on like one person, it's not a case study, you know, when like I posted one on Relora today, which is why it's on my mind. I'll put it on the forum and then I'll archive it in the first post of the thread. So maybe it will say agmatine and anxiety and then a link to the research, and then in the thread itself we'll break down all the takeaway points. All of this to say is I've done a good couple of months digging onto neurochemistry, and we've got a good list of nootropics, you could say, although not being used for this purpose, in there that I feel will likely have not a significant impact, but likely have some kind of benefit at attenuating some of that neurotoxicity that we experience from androgen use.
Is this probably some of the things that Dr. Israel was mentioning on the podcast, that he was taking a few supplements to kind of help his cognitive abilities, because I think he was feeling some issues with decline there.
Yeah, I think there's some other bits I was going to mention that can also help with that is, and these are going to sound really basic things, but we kind of touched on drug selection a little bit, but picking drugs that aren't as neurotoxic is going to be, obviously for someone's training career. It's all well and good having great supplementation practices, which should obviously stick with you for your entire training, but also having limited exposure to certain drugs like Tren, Nandrolone, Dynabol, potentially EQ, all those things. But another one which kind of gets overlooked and is getting more and more, I guess, prominent is, and I'm laughing at myself because I'm going to say it, is sleep. And I've already kind of mentioned it once, but OSA, obstructive sleep apnea, is such a huge sort of factor in bodybuilding, which people are not necessarily aware of.
Yep.
That's going to have huge issues in terms of oxidative stress, neural degradation, all these sorts of things. It's like, get on top of that shit early, and then you stand a better chance in later life if you've done all that stuff from day one. So just to add in, definitely do what Joe's saying and take all the supplements on top, but like, get all the big rocks sorted first, like drug selection, sleep, diet. That is going to pay huge dividends down the line with brain health.
And Matt mentions not using drugs. So this would come into a specific drugs. This would come into a conversation about stack design. So we would want to have a specific goal that would need to be fulfilled with each choice of molecule that we would include in our stack design. So let's take, for example, an off-season bodybuilder. Their goals could essentially be broken down to, obviously, accrue new protein mass, add skeletal muscle mass. So we're going to need anabolism. If we can limit body fat gain, like anti-lipogenesis, great. If we can retain insulin sensitivity, great. And we can, again, this is like part of a personal needs analysis. If you draw all of that up and you have a suitable molecule that can fit into each, let's say we're going down our drug selection sheet and we come across Trenbolone, so potent steroidal progestin. Its unique benefit is that it has effects on the glucocorticoid receptor, which is going to reduce muscle protein breakdown. Other anabolics don't have the same affinity for that receptor and don't transcribe the same messaging, we'll say. It doesn't have the same effect. So Trenbolone, when we say, okay, it reduces muscle protein breakdown, it also increases muscle protein synthesis, just like any other anabolic. So it's got a bit of a double whammy on protein balance. But do we need to reduce muscle protein breakdown in a surplus? Are we at risk of high levels of muscle protein breakdown? No. Are there other molecules that can fulfill our role of growing muscle via their actions at the androgen receptor? Yes. Trenbolone is more neurotoxic than Primo or Mastron, a DHT derivative or something like that. So we obviously would leave it out, and similar vein to that. So we're achieving reducing neurotoxicity with that.
I've heard in an argument that you can even, it might be even beneficial for you to just minimize like trend dosing during a cut or like a prep, like even like 50 or 100.
Yeah. So if you,
for the sake of that function.
Yeah. And some people are much more sensitive to these, we'll say, androgenic consequences. Because Trenbolone is very tissue selective at low dosages, which means its action in skeletal muscle is going to be pretty potent, but you would get off-target side effects as you raise the dose. It becomes less tissue selective, and that's going to be variable. But if you look at how Trenbolone was originally prescribed in women, I believe it was 50 milligrams every 10 days. It was parabolin, wasn't it? And that was a hex ester. So when cleaved from the ester, about 50 milligrams every 10 days is clinically sufficient to prevent muscle wasting or sarcopenia in women. You'd be hard pressed to be able to convince anybody that a man would need more than 200 milligrams a week, even in the most severe deficit. For me and my clients in prep, it would be dosed depending on the rate of loss and depending on what the training biofeedback would be looking like in terms of the risk of muscle loss. But 75 to 150 milligram is a typical use case for an individual in a prep, at least of my clients. And yeah, the necessity to go above that isn't really there. And it's certainly not a drug that's going to have more favorable cosmetic outcomes as just compared to other androgens, because that would be driven by things like your androgen estrogen ratio. Your blood androgen estrogen ratio would basically have impact on fluid balance, how much fluid is retained intracellularly versus interstitially, extracellularly. You know, you could use Masteron, that we know from human data has been trialed up to very high dosages and is very well tolerated and doesn't have the same neurotoxic impact. But, you know, it's not about just not using drugs or using less drugs. It's how do I get to the place I want to be at in a way that has less consequence. It's not getting there, you know? And just briefly, because we were talking about stack design, estrogen is something that I feel is more fairly presented now, but estrogen is a wonderful molecule for bodybuilding, specifically estradiol. It's anabolic. It stimulates the GH-IGF axis. It's neuroprotective. It's cardioprotective. It's renal protective. It's
Great for sex drive.
It drives libido. It's fantastic, and we should keep. Sure, in a prep, there's going to be times, namely the end of your prep, where you are going to want to shift that androgen-estrogen ratio to favor androgens for a look specifically.
Yeah.
But at all of the times, you really want your estrogen as high as you can get it.
Crazy thing is, while I was trying to stay shredded for social media, I was crashing my estrogen for like a couple of years.
Yeah.
How do you feel on that?
Oh, dude. Oh man.
It's you see it in some people. They kind of falsely assume that all their fluid retention is estrogen mediated. They're like, all this fluid, man, it's all from estrogen. You're like, nah, it's not. Or some of it might be, but not all of it. And you end up trying to crush it, and joints feel shit, sex drive's gone, mood, energy, everything, like
So irritable.
yeah.
And even in a deficit, let's
not
say you do
feeling
that,
anything.
and then your performance tanks, and now your risk of muscle loss really starts stacking up.
Yeah, the health side of things is crazy. Like when you look at the even just the observational data on sort of cardiac risk is so much better with estrogen there. It's cardiac stuff's kind of one of my little babies, so I kind of dive into that a lot. But yeah, when you look at the mortality rates of men versus women being largely estrogen mediated, sort of pre-menopause, is pretty mad. So you want to keep that high.
I also didn't. I didn't supplement with anything GH related or GH secretagogue related at the time either. So obviously my IGF-1 was like pretty shit as well, just because my estrogen was low. I think the IGF-1 was like 100 throughout the entire time, literally bottom of the reference range. So definitely not
Optimal.
No, not
shredded though, right?
Couple years, but
That's all that counts. Man.
You got some cool pics for IG, right? That's the main thing.
what do you guys think about NAD plus then? I guess for cognitive abilities in decline, supplementing it.
NAD, NMN. Personally, I'm not a huge fan. I've not seen enough compelling data to kind of suggest its use. Now, I'll have to put my hand up and say I haven't, from the limited research I've seen, I haven't seen anything that would compel me to take it. I would rather focus on the bigger rocks that we've already mentioned. That being said, if research came out like we said at the start, I'm more than happy to change my mind and include it. It's just not something that I've not seen play out. Joe, what's your thoughts on that?
Not something I've ever looked into ever, because I specialize in physique development, and I put all of my time and attention into that. So I'd never be afraid to say, ask me anything outside of growing muscle or losing body fat.
Okay.
I'm not going to know the answer.
I'll tell you what, when we go back and I realise I can't sleep because I've taken too many stimulants today, I'm gonna have a look into it while Joe sleeps.
Well, I see it primarily used in the anti-aging realm.
Yeah, that's why I looked
That's
into
not a
it.
realm that I've ever dove into.
This is why I looked into it, but when I kind of had a brief foray, it seemed quite equivocal. But then again, I'd need to have another look. So let me come back to you on that one. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert.
Okay. And then I guess what about Dr. Israel mentioned that he likes to take Neopept?
we spoke about this yesterday in the airport.
Yeah,
Go.
Yeah, so somebody had asked me about Neopept, and on an Instagram post, and I was going through basically what I have found thus far in the human literature on its actions and who it would be suitable for. Again, a lot of these nootropics over the years, it's something that I've always been really interested in. You see the nootropic come in and it's very popular, and then less people use it. You know, we've had all kinds, bromontane, Neopept, pregnenolone. The cycle goes round and round, and various research chemicals. There's genuine clinical efficacy in individuals that have neurodegenerative disease, or if they potentially have a damaged GABA system, if they've used a lot of benzodiazepines for a long period of time, or more common in the bodybuilding world, they've used a lot of Phenibut or something like that, then it would have good clinical efficacy. Not great data on its ability to be neuroprotective for bodybuilders, but that research is never going to be done, and we do tend to see crosstalk between Alzheimer's, dementia, incidence risk, and the same kind of pathways as androgen, so potentially, but too early doors on the research to be able to comment much on there. Using it as a nootropic, it's interesting because it appears to be pretty glutamatergic, and I find people that are more of the phenotype to be jittery, anxious, high energy, overthinkers. You know, I'm this kind of type of person, and if I use something that's glutamatergic in nature like that, it makes me worse, more anxious, more jittery. Whereas if I use something GABAergic or something that quenches glutamate, I feel much better. So it's something that I've not personally used, but a lot of people get on really well with it. I've also seen a lot of people have issues combining it with psychedelics. It seems to potentiate psychedelics quite drastically, and I've seen lots of case reports, not personally like consulted with. I mean, I've seen people written reports that they've had issues with HPPD, which is a form of persistive hallucination that continues past the point of their drug use. Like they'll see tracers in, like if I'm moving my hand like this, maybe they would get what's called palinopsia, which would be almost like a shutter effect and things like that. So it's definitely having, I would say, maybe some kind of effect on the HT2A receptor, maybe. I don't know. Again, just sort of talking in hypotheses here. So yeah, that's my sort of general overview of it.
It was kind of funny when you said don't take NAC before taking MDMA. One of your
that's right. Yeah.
If you don't want to feel as good.
Yeah. So NAC, given its effects on glutamate and then therefore effects on dopamine, you'll certainly find that if you do use recreational drugs, no matter what they are really, MDMA, amphetamines, kratom, other opiates, not benzos, it won't have an effect on a benzo, then yeah, it will, in some people, drastically attenuate the outcome. And I mentioned the MDMA one because NAC for recovery from MDMA has become super popular. Something that people do, and then they consistently stay on MDMA, and then you'll hear this, I think I've lost the magic. I got nothing off my roll this time, you know, but if you do remove the NAC in sufficient time, it won't have the impact. But NAC is an interesting one because of its effects on glutamate. There's lots of user reports of individuals that have suffered anhedonia, sometimes for extended periods of time. Anybody that doesn't know what anhedonia means, it's essentially a loss of pleasure in things that you would previously enjoy. Maybe there's a food you love to eat, but you just don't care about it anymore. You just don't really care about anything, like very flat. And one of the terms I read on, it was interesting. It was a quote from a seminar of a bunch of researchers discussing their findings regarding the neurotoxic effects of MDMA. I think it was sponsored by MAPS. And one of the quotes says that NAC appears to low the highs and high the lows. And that was interesting. So it's kind of flattening you out a bit. Some people notice no negative impact like you don't.
No.
So, you know, something that you use every day. When I use NAC, especially in high dosages, it definitely dulls my compulsions, because I am somebody with like lots of these strange ritual compulsive things that I do. But it certainly flatlines any like dopaminergic outcome. Like I use intranasal bromontane every day, one of my favorite nootropics. I would find I get very little from that. Or if I took NAC the morning that I took a DRI modafinil or Adderall or something like that, it would be severely dampened by that.
Wow.
But it would also just dampen my vigor for anything. And yeah, apparently I'm not alone with that. It's quite common. It seems to be also common in KSM 66.
Yeah.
Ashwagandha use, quite common
Yeah.
that people have.
Right.
Don't you?
I think this is why kind of like blanket recommendations for nootropics do not work, because everyone has
Or any
quite-
drug.
Oh yeah, for any drug. But I think people
Yeah.
like to do it in specific. They're like, "What's your nootropic stack?" You're like, "Mine and Joe's looks similar but quite different because we have different brain chemistry." Funnily enough,
Right.
and yeah, I seem to be able to do things slightly different than you and get. I get a hell of a buzz of bromontane where you don't get as much as I do, and it's individual on that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've been trying to experiment that with myself as well. I've been really like self-conscious and worried that like my KM66 use has been affecting me, but honestly, it hasn't.
Yeah,
so I'm happy to find out that
it's easy to
affecting me.
placebo yourself with that stuff as well, because you know, life isn't extremely fun all the time.
Yeah.
You know, so if you read something like this molecule could cause anhedonia, you think, oh yeah, I'm not that excited about things. It's like, likely as you age,
How much of that is expectation?
Also, as you age,
like you
Right.
kind of placebo yourself into thinking this way. Yeah.
Placebo is a fucking dangerous thing, though. Like, I do a lot with kind of erectile dysfunction with clients. Get a lot of consultations and things like that, and I would say over half the time, over 50%, it's psychological, and like they think they've got a problem, and it's like you play detective, right? You go through every single avenue, all these things, and it boils down to the fact like you're just psyching yourself out of getting hard on. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'll get to the point where I almost have to lie to them, be like, we'll change this thing and this will fix you. I haven't changed fuck all. And then it will fix them. And then like, does it work? They're like, yeah. And I have to tell them like, this is placebo. Like, there's nothing wrong with you now. And like, oh shit, like my dick works. Like, yep, fix you. Like, but I've done nothing. I've just stopped them worrying about it. And that's like a lot of the time. And if you're expecting to have like, I feel flat. Well, if you're expecting to feel that way, you're probably going to feel that way, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've had I feel like a majority of medical professionals that have come on my podcast have said the exact same thing when it comes to erectile dysfunction. Literally, a majority of their clients, a lot of the root of the issues come from just psychology and just literally like you overthinking it, which is like fucking unfortunate because it's hard to just like go into the bedroom and be like,
It's fucking hard. Like,
It's not.
well, yeah, I was gonna say, I wish it was. The thing I think, if you use a PDE5 inhibitor like Viagra, Cialis, if that's not working, like the highest likelihood is that you are psychologically blocking it to some degree. Like these drugs work; they fucking work. That's why they are one of the most popular drugs in existence.
yeah, Cialis is fire.
Yeah, Cialis is fucking sick.
Cialis also reduces brain inflammation.
It is it's an all-time go drug.
I saw a
Right.
study recently on it improving cognition also.
Yeah.
So
There's also, I mean, I think they could probably use it for fucking everything, but it's a fucking potent drug. And so when it's not working, I'm like, is it really not working, or is it you are literally overthinking it to death? Because the only time it's not going to work is if you have impaired blood flow to your penis, unless you've got some sort of serious atherosclerotic issue, which is unlikely for most people of a healthy age. It's psychological.
talking about the penis,
Carry on, Joe.
to reel it back to stack design,
Yeah.
DHT as resulting from 5-alpha reductase from testosterone. So people confuse this all the time. I'm talking about DHT molecule, not a DHT derivative, because Masteron is not DHT, Primobolin is not DHT, Anavar is not DHT. They're derived from DHT. They don't do what DHT does. Anyway, DHT has roles in the penis that are very important, like in development, the size and growth of your penis.
My favorite story.
Stack design in absence of testosterone. For example, I'm going to do nandrolone only, or I'm going to do an oral only cycle of Anavar or something like that, where you'll have HPG axis shut down, no endogenous testosterone or exogenous testosterone, therefore no 5-alpha reductase into DHT or aromatization into estradiol is not a good idea for anybody.
You think for anybody at all?
Well,
I think like I agree with that. I guess I'm always just surprised to hear like Tyan Clark and his like small cohort of guys, like this tiniest percentage of dudes who for some reason like NPP and DECA only does work well with.
Well,
but I've experimented, it doesn't work for me.
So can we define works?
I guess like the issues that they have, the side effects that they have with testosterone that they don't like or that affects them in a, it's not an issue anymore, including hair loss, and then their dick still gets hard.
Well, you will still lose hair on nandrolone. If you're subject to male pattern baldness, if you express the gene, there will always be shedding. It will vary in magnitude depending on the degree of action, like DHT. Again, not DHT derivatives. This is important. When people say like masteron will shed your hair, it's less likely to drive shedding than testosterone because it has no resultant DHT. But androgen load in and of itself will contribute towards hair shedding. So nandrolone will contribute towards shedding, but yes, less than testosterone for sure.
Yeah.
But at what cost? Right. We've just been through all the fantastic benefits of estradiol.
I think we also have to look at kind of going, I'm sure it might work. Like, as Joe said,
it definitely works.
Yeah.
So that was my point when I said, how do we define works? It binds at the androgen receptor, increases muscle protein synthesis. It's going to work.
And there are going to be circumstances, and just going like, let's say sexual function, right? You might have someone who has a large overexpression of estrogen at a given dose of testosterone, and whilst we would always avoid the generic use of an AI to lower estrogen, they may, for whatever reason, be that individual who has a massive overexpression and they can't control it in balancing the androgen ratio, and they have
that is extremely rare, by the way.
This is extremely.
Professor Scott Howells did actually do the numbers on the likelihood of that, and it was so minute.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that I'm sure there are people out there. It's not as common as people think, but we can't sit here and disregard and say that doesn't happen. Like, I'm sure it will, but I think it's like me sitting and saying keto worked for me. Have you tried under really controlled circumstances another way of doing it, which may have worked better? If you have, I'll shut the fuck up, and I can absolutely concede that would be the right move. If they've not tried it another way, maybe give it a go. I mean, I'm not saying they should if they feel fucking great and they've got everything sorted, but we know the benefits of DHT, and just touching on the DHT side of things, we all kind of laugh when we talk about micro penis, right? Like, people go, fuck, he's got micro penis. Not me. I do not. Right? Well, just point out. But that's from lack of 5-alpha duct days as a kid. You haven't got the ability to express that, and you haven't got DHT to the penis. It doesn't form properly. You lack penile rigidity with lack of DHT. So if you haven't got DHT, you're not as hard. Okay, and we see this with people that take finasteride. So people that blocks 5AR. We know that in certain cases they're going to get a reduction in penile rigidity, not as hard, haven't got as much sexual function, not great things. On nandrolone, like I say, doesn't convert. There's no conversion to DHT.
Converts to DHN.
Yeah. If they haven't got that, then potentially, I'm not saying they would, but potentially you might be running into problems. Now, obviously, I don't really know the situation, and I wouldn't want to sit here and say it's not working, because if they're happy and they're fucking shagging away and getting hard as a rock, like, more power to them. But it's always a concern when we hear people say that for the reasons mentioned, but absolutely no dig at Tyan or
right.
Just,
I mean, so per milligram, it will not cause as much shedding as testosterone. Per milligram, it is more neurotoxic than testosterone. Per milligram, it will not cause less shedding than masteron, for example, a DHT derivative, because masteron is greatly reduced in androgenicity. That's what it was clinically developed for. So the androgen impact is going to be less, but at high doses of the kind of milligrams that bodybuilders use, you will have the net effect of these androgen loads on the scalp. I'm not a hair loss expert, but that mechanism is relatively well understood. It's not just DHT mediated, and there's lots of other confounding variables like scalp inflammation or oxidative stress. You know, it's why people use derma microneedlings and things like that, if you can drive local angiogenesis there. You know, and I think if we start to come into a conversation about decreasing hair loss moderately at the expense of neurotoxicity, I think is problematic. Similarly with people that would use nandrolone, because let's say they say, well, I use a gram of nandrolone because I can't use a gram of testosterone without estrogenic side effects. Well, then we could say, okay, let's say you use an equivalent dose of testosterone for the same estrogenic outcome of that dose of nandrolone that you can tolerate, whatever that may be, hypothetically. Maybe that's 500 milligrams of testosterone. And then alongside that, you could use 500 milligrams of masteron or primobolan. Well, now you have the same 1,000 milligrams of total androgen binding at the androgen receptor, transcribing anabolism, driving up muscle protein synthesis, turning on anabolic pathways like mTOR, etc., but in a manner that is less neurotoxic. So anabolism between those two is going to practically be the same.
Is this the main reason that you guys don't include nandrolone in your stacks?
So the only again, so we come back to that personal needs analysis. You have to fulfill a specific goal with the unique compound, and you would want to pick the least deleterious option to still get you where you want to go. So if we know that we require 1,000 milligrams to get from here to here, and we can choose between nandrolone or testosterone and masteron, well, the testosterone and masteron or primobolan or whatever other DHT derivative, just as I'm not saying this is like our stack design that we use for everything, but we're just using this working example. If we know that the health cost is less, which we do know in terms of neurotoxicity and other things, because we know what estradiol is so great for, then we would pick that one. And if that's at the expense of some additional hair shedding, then maybe we need to rethink our approach of where we're going here. The only use case that I've seen fairly described for nandrolone is for the joint, tendon, ligament integrity part, because there's a very small amount of research suggesting that nandrolone can help relieve joint, tendon, ligament issues, and the anecdote seems to play true to that, that people do experience that. So if you wanted to add in an adjunct 100 milligrams to 200 milligrams of nandrolone or something like that, I don't think it's going to be hugely consequential, but I do think it's a really bad idea to have it as the anchor of your stack design, what's primarily driving protein accretion.
Just using my little car analogy again, which I always come back to because people can visualize it. Imagine you've got two cars to get you to destination, and you've got one car and you're like, brakes are good, we just checked the tires, and it's got a seat belt. Other car doesn't have that. Which one do you want to drive? And you're like, I'll drive the safer one. I think that's that's the idea. It's like, we know one of them's safer, but like safer potentially. So like, probably drive that car. But if they're like, I really want to fucking drive that car, i.e. nandrolone, you're like, cool. Like, we told you the risks. Like, those are the side effects you might run into. If you're happy with that, crack on.
Right. Yeah. I really like that approach that you guys have, because I think it's the same way that I like to approach these things, like in a way that's like, can we avoid using this and still meet our competitive goals? What is the reason that you guys prefer to avoid EQ if you do?
So Boldenone, EQ, is a veterinary drug, first and foremost. So I would always prefer that we use a drug that, and there can be hierarchies to this, right, at least has some published data on use in humans. You know, let's say we're back in COVID, right, and the government say to you, we got the vaccine, but we never tested it in a human, but it works on horses. It works well on horses. How willing would you be to take it with those words, it's never been tested in humans? Me personally, I wouldn't, but again, it's a personal ethical thing. If someone says, I don't care if it's been tested in humans, I don't care if it's safe in humans or not, I get good results from it. But again, we come back to this. What are the results driven by anabolic androgenic steroids? It's what they do at the androgen receptor. We know that they all do it. So what's the unique benefit? There is no unique benefit. So we don't have a sufficient cohort of data on its use in humans for us to be able to get predictable outcomes. And in the rodent data, we see at equivalent dosages that it is more renal toxic than testosterone, meaning kidney toxic. Now, does that occur in a human population? I'm certainly not saying that. We don't know, but that's the point. We don't know. And if it isn't doing anything, you know, if people took boldenone and grew way faster than any other molecule, then it would be very interesting. Maybe we could have a risk analysis at that point, but we don't see that. And we don't see that in the Hirschberger assays, for example, in rodent models that are not something that I would use. Like, please, nobody get me wrong there. Hirschberger assays are far from accurate representations of androgenicity or anabolism. But like, just collating all of the data we have, we see no unique benefit. Anecdotally, you'll get the odd person to say, oh, I love EQ, I'll blow up when I take it. But usually it's just you know, that there'll be too many confounding variables in there. What's clearly not happening is people are experiencing ridiculously faster progression, and we have other drugs that do the job just fine, that do have wide-scale clinical use, decades of data of use in humans, up to dosages that we can at least look at and say, okay, when humans take this, it does this, and these are the risks, and these are potentially what I'm escalating those risks with doing, you know?
With EQ in particular, there's definitely a subset of bodybuilders that really seem to like it anecdotally. There's definitely some concerns in not being in human use. It's got neurotoxicity, renal toxicity, increased anger in rodents, which is quite funny. But there is a subset within bodybuilding, certainly within the UK, and some guys at my gym, and we've had some good discussions about it. And again, like I've always said, we don't want to have that conversation like, why the fuck are you using that? Because that's not helpful for anyone. So I'm like, why are you using it? And we're having an open conversation. They're like, because I really like it. I'm like, what does really like it look like to you? They're like, I feel fuller, bigger, I feel like I get better gains. I'm like, can you quantify
Blood cell
that?
count.
Sorry?
I said blood cell count feels great.
Yeah.
Well, the effects on hematology,
yeah.
pretty.
And they're saying all this stuff, and I'm going, cool. Like, okay, based on what we've seen in rodent data and horse data, if you're going to take it, make sure you're getting regular kidney checks. Maybe get a kidney ultrasound once a year. Make sure you're taking a lot of antioxidants. We know curcumin, we know vitamin C is used in research to kind of offset some of that increased oxidative stress. Make sure you're taking ARB. Make sure you're taking an ARB for your hematocrit also. Do all this stuff. And then you're thinking, personally, I would be thinking, why the fuck am I taking all this extra stuff to mitigate this drug when I could just be taking another steroid? But if you really want to take it, like, again, that's on you. And at least we're having that conversation where they're at least potentially a little bit safer than not. But the answer does always come down to, we have other drugs which are in human clinical use, potentially safer, with more data. Why would you not use that? If they want to use something else, go in with your eyes open.
Yeah, I want to be clear as well. Like, I don't think it's like a terrible thing to do. You know, like I'm not trying to be sensationalist about it. Quite simply, like, a lot of people use it, and there's not people bowling over with absolutely crushed EGFRs or something like that. So it's probably on a similar scale of renal toxicity to other androgens. It's probably just slightly less benign, but the point is no additional benefit, no unique benefit to the molecule. So it's a simple, what's the point? We don't know a lot about it. Could be a bit more renal toxic. Other stuff works just as good. Just use that instead.
I see.
You know?
Yeah. Would that be a similar reason for nandrolone, just like the neurotoxicity?
Exactly, yeah. Like, our discussions on nandrolone, I'm not trying to be too sensationalist about it. Like, well, if you anchor your stack design with nandrolone, then you're going to have a traumatic brain injury or your dick's going to fall off or something, you know. But, you know, quite simply, when we break down the specific individual mechanisms of what anabolic androgenic steroids do, most, you know, for the most part, we're talking genomically, so direct action at the androgen receptor. They all do that. So you might as well pick one that is the most benign and that has solid human literature behind it, which nandrolone does. Nandrolone has been and is used clinically, so it does tick a box there. But the concerns, for me, the neurotoxicity is the biggest thing. Just outweigh the benefits when there's no unique benefit.
When do you think it's sensible to use Clenbuterol?
I've written an ebook on Clenbuterol.
I will do an impartial review. I would tell Joe if it was shit as well, because we've got that relationship. And it is not shit. It's the best single resource ever been written on Clenbuterol that exists on the internet. And I will happily say that. And even if he wasn't my business partner and a mate, I would still buy it.
Thanks,
so
mate.
strongly.
He would say that.
I would actually say if it was shit.
He's earning some money from it, but the reviews thus far have been glowing. But anyway, my point of saying that was not to sell more ebooks, but it's hard for us to sit here and me talk about Clenbuterol in depth when I've got like a 40-page ebook with something like 38 references that took me months and months and months to pass through. But you asked me when is a sensible time to use it. Well,
maybe you could give us a quick rundown.
Yeah, well, the primary outcome is going to be an increase in resting energy expenditure. So when you need to skew energy balance to favor more rested energy expenditure, you may want to use it, and that is going to be in periods of deficit. Not to say that Clenbuterol doesn't have benefits outside of a deficit, because it does. It does impact skeletal muscle hypertrophy and power output. So females, for example, if you're avoiding androgen exposure because you don't want to pay the cost of virilization, then it is an additional quote-unquote anabolic tool. It's not going to have a robust effect. It's not going to be as effective as anabolics. But when you are in a deficit, you would likely choose that as your first lipolytic because it is incredibly impactful. One of the most insightful pieces of feedback that I've had from the ebook was I didn't know Clen was this strong, was this powerful, because we went through the data. There's a study on humans using 80 micrograms a day, and the increase in rested energy expenditure was, I can't remember off the top of my head, it was like 21. Yeah, I was going to say 22. 21%. Huge.
Oh, wow.
And that's 80 micrograms. And the interesting thing about that is you will see that kind of dose used therapeutically over long durations of time. So we can say, quote unquote, pretty safe as far as our risk profile for drugs go. And again, I go through all the cardiac data in that study, and there was in that ebook, and there's a study where they titrate up to 720 micrograms of Clenbuterol per day in humans with heart failure. And their heart condition doesn't improve. Maybe you wouldn't expect it to. That's actually what it was being trialed for, those outcomes, but it doesn't worsen. So that's pretty incredible, considering that we get very concerned about 80 micrograms, 120 micrograms or something like that. I haven't needed to go that high with clients personally, but 80 micrograms being pretty close or at the therapeutic dose range in terms of risk profile is going to be pretty damn low as compared to the other drugs that we use in bodybuilding. And it not only is lipolytic, so increases fat oxidation, it's also anti-catabolic. So a very, I would say, effective drug for bodybuilding that's currently used in human clinical use, that we have a good data set on. So sorry, I rambled on there.
No,
the actual answer I could have said in 2 words: a deficit.
I love it. I think it's probably straight off the bat, provided there's no kind of contraindication, someone's got an existing arrhythmia or anything like that, then I would probably just put it in straight away. We have to understand that the data is usually on a single pharmacological agent rather than a polypharmacy approach. So there's no data in terms of going, we've got no study saying we've got anabolics, growth hormone, thyroid, yohimbine, all these things, and then Clen. So we haven't got that polypharmacy approach. So there may be some detrimental effects to that. We would have probably seen that come out in anecdote. We've probably seen people run into problems. We don't tend to. That isn't saying it's not happening, but I personally, I think it's a fucking brilliant drug. It's got fantastic benefits. Seems relatively safe, and yeah, use it if you are so inclined.
Yeah, and in that ebook, I obviously break down the literature and what we know and what it does across all inputs, whether that be hypertrophy, fat loss, how it drives lipolysis, what fat mobilization, oxidization is and whatnot. But we also pass through all of the side effects noted in these human studies from the participants, how frequently it occurred, how we would want to attenuate the likelihood of those side effects, whether you need to cycle it or not, and things like this. Like every single aspect is, it sounds like I'm doing a sales pitch for the ebook, but what I'm saying is, if there is an issue, that just like all drugs, we would prefer a titration and minimum effective dose for the desired end result approach. You know,
do you happen to have like an approximation or average for like the minimum effective dose
of Clenbuterol? Well, the minimum effective dose technically for every drug is like 1 micrograms, you know, because it's going to do something. To have a robust outcome that's notable, 20 micrograms a day for sure. I mean, just extrapolate that out to that 21% increase at 80. Well, that means at 40, roughly at 10%, at 20 micrograms. And I know dose response doesn't work like this, but you know, you're going to have at least 5% increase in resting energy expenditure on average. Obviously, we've been through biological into individuality, which is large.
What I'll usually do is with a client, I'll ask them, like, how do you respond to stimulants? How anxious are you? Because some people have that subjective feeling of anxiety. If they're a person who's potentially a smaller, let's say a female, or someone who has larger like anxiety side, I'll start with like 20, and then I'll see, how do you feel? And I'll maybe move up. Typically, if it's a guy 100 plus kilos, I'll say stick him on 40 straight away, unless he's like got anxiety or anything like that. How do you feel? Probably just bump up to 80 once the jitters have subsided, which is usually within the 5 to 10 day mark, and then just hold them there. There's usually no reason to increase because you've got other agents you can put into play. From a practical standpoint, that's usually how I'd put it out there. But obviously, there are cases where I wouldn't do it like that.
Yeah, and the sympathetic drive input is the sort of primary thing that we can't avoid and have to deal with Clenbuterol. It's a very long-acting stimulant. Its effects on catecholamines, like increase in norepinephrine, or trying to think of the difference between American and UK. It is epinephrine here, isn't it? And we call it noradrenaline. Anyway, and that has negative impacts on things like your ability to drive parasympathetic tone if you're heavily sympathetic all the time. Parasympathetic tone is a branch of the autonomic nervous system, we would call it feed and breed or rest and digest. That's where bodybuilders want to be as much of the time as possible.
Which sucks.
Yeah. So it's not great for that. Because it is so long acting, it will go obviously through your sleep. But over time, there is an adaptation to the perceived stimulant impact, but you won't get a reduction back to your normal resting heart rate, for example. That would indicate that it's not actually driving the outcome that you want it to, which is the increase in RMR driven by its impacts on sympathetic tone via the beta adrenergic receptor. And like Matt said, your best bet is to not, similar to what we were talking about anabolics, actually, not have like a 2 week on, 2 week off cycle or something where you're going to take 80 micrograms for 2 weeks, then take 2 weeks off. Again, I go through all the down regulation and desensitization data in that ebook, but I mean, plausibly, it's only going to get more effective, hypothetically, the longer that you run it. But there definitely isn't any desensitization to Clenbuterol, so you'd be much better off to run at a stable dose for the duration of your deficit, allow yourself to desensitize to the stimulant impact, but still reap the reward of fat loss over an extended period of time. And then rather than exceed above dosages, let's say you get to 80 micrograms and you want to manipulate your drug stack to drive more fat loss, well, rather than pay the cost of increase in sympathetic tone with an additional Clenbuterol bump, you would bring in another metabolic pathway that would not only give you additional benefits that you're searching for, but also work in synergy with, which is how I prefer to design any PED protocol. For example, your himbine, an alpha-2 receptor antagonist. I've also got an ebook on yohimbine. I'll send you both of these after this. To actually potentiate it. So now you've got like a 1 + 1 = 3 effect, and do that over a longer duration rather than some kind of cyclical pattern of use.
Okay, I see. Gotcha. How, for the women, how would you compare the virilization of Clen to Primo?
So virilization means...
Clen doesn't virilize.
Hold on. So virilization is... You've put me off, man. So, just for anybody that doesn't know, virilization is essentially when we talk about masculinization, like growth of terminal body hair, deepening of the voice, enlargement of the clitoris, things like this. And that is a process of hormonal or hormonally mediated gender reassignment. And for that to occur, you have to have exposure to androgens. It's via the androgen receptor. Clenbuterol has zero action at the androgen receptor and therefore will not drive virilization. So when you're looking at female PED models, most women that use PEDs are not wanting virilization. Some women don't care. Some women have to pay some degree of cost at some point to get to where they're wanting to go. But we want to minimize that. So any drug that drives muscle growth, or so anabolism or anti-catabolism or anti-lipogenesis or lipolysis, all of these things that ultimately are going to come together to making you bigger, leaner, stronger, whatever it may be. Androgens, exposure to androgens is the very last trick you want to pull out of the hat.
Yep.
Do everything else first, all at the same time, build synergies as much as possible, and then only use androgens very acutely. All of that to say,
Which would normally be like Primo, and then following that maybe Anavar.
Yeah, so the most divorced from androgenicity, we'd say. So if you look at anabolic androgenic steroids through their clinical development, luckily for us bodybuilders, because they are used in treatment settings in women or children sometimes, or the elderly, the goal has been to remove as much of the androgenic consequence of testosterone as possible whilst retaining the anabolism, not increasing. Again, this is why these molecules all end up being about as anabolic as one another. We have reduced androgenicity, and you've got various pharmaceutical companies competing to see who can get the most, the most divorced from androgenicity molecule possible. This is why things like non-steroidal SARMs like Ostarine have been funded for clinical development and things. Unfortunately, we haven't got there yet. I do think we will do, though, one day. In the research on women that are exposed to androgens, the most benign are clearly right now DHT derivatives like Primobolan, Masteron, Anavar. And when I say Masteron, people are like, no way, Masteron's like super androgenic. No women should take Masteron. There's just no data to support that.
We've actually got studies of people taking Primo at 1,200 milligram per week in females. So it's like,
not to say.
I'm not saying do that.
Not to say that, because
I'm not saying do that.
You will virilize.
Yeah, you will virilize at that
the
point.
study notes well tolerated.
Yes,
so
we've got data showing it has been that the reason they compared that against I think 300 milligram of testosterone. People obviously had very bad effects with testosterone. Yeah. They had a lot less effects. They still virilized, obviously, as you said, but it was less so than testosterone for the reasons Joe mentioned. Was it's designed for that reason. It is designed for less androgenicity.
You holding up your hand to your crotch when you said virilization was crazy.
I was like, I was just holding on to what I've got.
Out of curiosity, what are you guys' input on growth hormone secretagogues like MK versus Tesamorelin?
So
I'll just say quite simply, we know growth hormone works. We know it works, and I don't think we've got enough data to say. Certainly like growth hormone releasing peptides or anything like that, I wouldn't feel as confident to say, whilst they work, we don't know the long-term data, and we know growth hormone does. I certainly think MK677 is trash, and I'll go on happily say that. I think it destroys your insulin sensitivity. It fucks your hunger up, and whilst yes, it does raise systemic IGF-1, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for localized IGF-1 elevations for muscle growth. So I would say I think most people are doing it to try and save money. And I think if that's your sole reason
Yep.
for doing it, first, I don't think you're going to save that much. And I think whilst it could be okay, I would rather see people just use growth hormone because we know it's got very robust data. We know it works and relatively safely.
Yeah, so growth hormone has been used in a clinical setting for decades and decades and decades. Hundreds of thousands of people have been prescribed growth hormone over the world for all of this time. And we have so much published data on growth hormone in humans that, you know, alongside testosterone or alongside insulin, one of the most studied molecules that we have. So we've got these predictable outcomes with it. We know exactly what it does, at what dose, what the costs, what the benefits are. And it works, obviously. That's why bodybuilders use it. I mean, we'd have to put what works means in context. And then we have GHRP and GHRH peptides, like you mentioned, ipamorelin, tesamorelin, GHRP 1, 2, whatever. And we're using those in an effort to cause a bleed or, in some cases, a dump of our own endogenous growth hormone. So the outcome is the same molecule, right? Either injecting recombinant human growth hormone to then have presence of growth hormone in the blood, or using a GHRP or GHRH peptide to then have growth hormone in the blood. It kind of comes, well, what's the point doing this one when this one does it just fine, and we have loads of data on it? GHRP and GHRH peptides, the data isn't quite there, I think, to present us with efficacy in supraphysiological cases. You know, if somebody wanted to do it as part of a hormone replacement therapy protocol, I think based on the data that we've got, that would be a solid suggestion. But we don't have good data on its ability to drive supraphysiological levels of blood growth hormone, or what the consequential IGF-1 outcome would be.
I see. Yeah, I feel that. And also I think, I mean, obviously GH being around for ages has always been incredibly beneficial in that regard. But I think tesamorelin, out of all the peptides, I think has been, at least in my experience, and then also I guess in a lot of anecdotal experiences with clients, seems to be really, really nice and beneficial, especially with like lipodystrophy or like trying to target your belly fat. And this is probably just bro science. I really don't know anything about this.
We like the bro science.
Okay. But I could be sounding absolutely ignorant and dumb right now, but I think I've always had the thought of like, I don't really want to run, being a bodybuilder, competitive bodybuilder, I don't want to run GH year round for years. So honestly, what I planned instead was running GH for like a small period of time. And then whenever I jump off of GH, I use tesamorelin to, you know, just boost my...
It would depend how you're dosing the growth hormone, you know, because...
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if your goal was to like restore endogenous growth hormone secretion, you wouldn't need to do anything, because within 20, we know it's not there is a negative feedback inhibition, but it's acute for the duration of action of the drug. So you would secrete growth hormone normally when you remove the exogenous growth hormone anyway. There won't be like lag time. And I don't know actually if you were like trying to supercharge your pituitary to secrete more growth hormone. I would argue that that's hypothetically likely to lead you to a worse place with regard to endogenous growth hormone secretion over time.
You're basically pumping the gas on it, and I feel that that's gonna
like if you rev your car to death, you know,
you're gonna redline it essentially.
I see.
What's the risk of?
But again, we don't know that because the research isn't there. Depending on dosing, we've got good research that it is able to crank up endogenous growth hormone secretion.
Just a question back: is there any reason why you would stop growth hormone to go onto that? Or is it just like, what was the logic behind the switch?
It's not something that I actually really do, but it's just a theory that I had of like maybe I think I always just err on the side of like, to be honest, I would like to say I err on the side of caution.
Yeah. So that's a really good point that you mentioned there, because some of these decisions do seem to be erring on the side of caution, but we could then say erring on the side of caution by using a research chemical as compared to using a pharmaceutical that's been used for decades and well understood. Because these things, they do seem like the almost like safer, cleaner.
It's got like a natural fallacy almost. It's like
that's what it is.
We're using something that your body, we're just turning up the knob on it, as opposed to inject it. You know what I mean? We're taking this exogenous thing. All we're doing is ramping up your body's own production. It almost seems nicer and like boxed off, but it's like, again, like we just said, is are you just redlining the engine by revving it up? It all kind of boils down to what we've kind of said a few times is, if we've got a drug that we know is relatively safe, we've got fuckloads of data on it, versus a drug that isn't as much data, which one do you want to use? Like, and then just kind of like look at it like that, you go, probably the one with more data. That isn't to suggest what you're saying is a silly thing to do or has any risk with it. It's just more like, given the two, which one sounds better?
So do you think there is any like dosage of growth hormone and length of time taking it that would negatively affect your endogenous production?
No.
At any point? No?
No. We know that from individuals treated clinically with growth hormone.
Well, okay, cool.
Similar with exogenous thyroid, actually.
That's a slightly longer lag, but
I did a video on Physique Collective breaking down normal thyroid function individuals, will say individuals that aren't hypothyroid, that take exogenous T4 monotherapy or a combination T4 T3, when they cease use, there is no long-term downregulation of thyroidal axis output. You normalize pretty quickly. I think the maximum noted in those studies was 14 days of full recovery of TSH.
Wow.
Free T4.
Yeah. After how long do you know that they were taking it?
These are individuals that were taken in, I think it was off of survey-based study or something. They've been using it for many months.
It's usually pretty quick.
Or they've been treated for years on their exogenous thyroid.
We can actually see this, like, again, it's not published data, but what will happen quite a lot of the time is, say you've got a client who is in a contest prep scenario. They're going to get some downregulation of thyroid. They'll come out of their contest prep. They'll go through their recovery phase, gain some body fat, food goes up. There's going to be a lag in there in basically what their body would be able to do anyway if they were endogenous production. You leave T3 or T4 or T3 in. You could, and we have done this before, is pull it, test it, then in a couple of weeks' time you can see it's back. So you kind of, when they've earned the right to pull it, if that makes sense, where they're in a healthy spot to pull it, because out of the doors of prep, it's kind of propping up their metabolism. If I'm going to use a really bro sciencey term.
Yeah. If you're coming off of prep, that's not a healthy place.
And when they're okay and everything, they're in a better position, you could pull it if you were so inclined, and you could probably track the recovery, and it's something we've done before.
Okay, cool, awesome. Yeah, that was the main reason I was asking. Is just like I never had even close to the understanding that it was that fast. The lag was that small.
Yeah, and I think people in the bodybuilding world still see exogenous thyroid as like, that's the last resort, the very last thing you pull out the bag, when, you know, realistically, look at it in context. When you go into an energy deficit, there is some downregulation of thyroidal axis output. Let's say from day one of the deficit, you use T4 and T3, but at true replacement dosages, i.e. if you were hypothyroid and you got a prescription and you go and look at your blood work and you're free T3 and free T4 within a specific allocated range, you're not hyperthyroid. If you did that from day one of your deficit, you're not cranking up some kind of inherent risk of muscle loss. That is not going to increase muscle protein breakdown, because it's the same metabolic outcome as you had the day before the diet, and you could run that for the duration of your whole diet and avoid that downregulation, but not increase the risk of muscle loss or anything like that. Now, if you are going to start moving into hyperthyroid ranges, interestingly, T3 increases muscle protein breakdown. It also increases muscle protein synthesis. Unfortunately, not to the same degree, so it sort of moves like that.
Yeah.
But if you are going to increase muscle protein breakdown with hyperthyroid dosages, yeah, you would need anabolism coming from elsewhere to support that. Resistance training, androgens, growth hormone, things like that, you know. But it's not this like crazy muscle wasting drug. There's a dose dependent effect, of course. If you start exceeding, I don't know, it's highly variable, but maybe like 50 micrograms of T3 a day, you're going to need some heavy anabolic support.
But you do have an opinion on semaglutide and muscle wasting?
Yeah. Nonsense. So anytime anytime an individual, so when people say that, it tells me that they haven't read the paper. This study says semaglutide makes you lose muscle. It's a very rookie error to confuse lean body mass with muscle. Because what the studies say is that individuals that use semaglutide lose lean body mass. Skeletal muscle is part of lean body mass, as is extracellular fluid or intracellular fluid, as is glycogen, as is intramuscular triglycerides. Every single individual on the planet that goes into a deficit loses lean body mass, but not every single individual loses protein weight. Because if you're in a deficit and you remain in positive protein balance, you can lose muscle in a deficit, and it does happen. It happens frequently. You can build muscle in a deficit as well. It happens frequently, not to a high magnitude. Semaglutide, there's nothing GLP-1 is doing to shift protein balance in terms of moving muscle protein breakdown up. What it can do is put an individual in such a severe deficit that they lose muscle, but that's not the drug doing that. There's nothing by the mechanism of action of GLP-1 agonists that increases the risk of muscle loss outside of it making you eat less. And if you resistance train and consume adequate protein and have a rate of loss that is standard with a deficit, maybe 0.5 to 1% of body weight drop per week, that drug is doing nothing to increase muscle loss any more than you just eating the calories sufficient to achieve the same rate of loss, but being a lot hungrier.
Right, yeah.
A good contrary example to that is, let's say, looking at the research of nandrolone, for example, and you'll see that they put on more lean mass than testosterone, but a large percentage of that was body water. Anyone looking at that would go, well, they haven't gained any muscle, have they? They just gained body water because they gained more lean mass. But obviously when people start thinking about losing muscle, they're like, fuck, I don't want to lose any muscle. And that thought process of this could be something other than actual contractile tissue goes out the window. And there have, of course, been studies. Well, I'm sure people have lost muscle mass. There's been studies where people have not eaten. That's probably a pretty good...
There was a man that fasted for
66 days.
Yeah.
That's a cool study. I'll tell you that in a second. But,
it's a case study of an obese man.
Yeah.
And the history of it's quite interesting. There's lots of articles on it where, like, he said, I'm going to do this no matter what. So... Can you look after me in the process? And
he didn't eat anything for 366 days, I think it was. There's more, the thing is, it might be slightly more, but either way, basically, there's in the GLP-1 agonist studies, people didn't eat because they obviously weren't fucking hungry. They couldn't eat anything. Putting yourself in a fast for an extended period of time, you are probably going to lose something, right? But that doesn't mean the drug was responsible for that. Like, that's the kind of you kind of need to separate the two. But I can completely understand why people would think that. But,
and you get the same confusion when people read growth hormone studies. They'll say growth hormone adds this much muscle at this dose, when actually in the studies looking at skeletal muscle with growth hormone, when used alone, even at obscene dosages, some of the therapeutic dosages of growth hormone be like 16 units and above a day, and it doesn't add a gram of skeletal muscle. It's not directly anabolic to skeletal muscle tissue, but people see lean body mass when actually it cranks up fluid retention,
I'll be honest, if someone said to me I was going to lose lean body mass, I'll be like, fuck off, right? I don't want to fucking do that.
Yeah.
But when you dive into it, I think you can take away that emotional, like, fuck response by just having a little gander at the data.
Yeah, as long as you exhibit the same behaviors that a bodybuilder would in a deficit anyway, it doesn't increase the risk, no.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I think they're fucking great drugs, to be honest with you. I think they're absolutely fantastic. There's off-target benefits, for example, people with ADHD and addiction as well.
The Rodent studies on GLP-1 agonists and its effects on cocaine consumption and alcohol consumption are fascinating. The neural effects of GLP-1 in the brain is incredible. And again, not to oversell the drugs, but they are revolutionary.
We're shilling for GLP-1.
Big GLP-1.
Yeah.
They are a huge thing. Think about the obesity crisis, how much it costs the taxpayer and whatnot, or how negatively impactful on somebody's life to have such aggressive hunger signaling is to have access to something like this that, look, I'm not going to say it's safe, but by all accounts it's pretty low risk for how effective it is. And when you look at a bodybuilding population, it's easy for people to sit there and be like, no one in bodybuilding should use that, you should be able to diet, you know, you shouldn't be doing bodybuilding if you can't diet.
But it ain't for you.
But you use every other drug. You know, it's like saying you should be able to grow muscle without testosterone. And at the same time, hunger has more of an effect on the physique than just being able to grit in and deal with the hunger, because it is in and of itself a fatigue driver. It's tiring to be hungry all the time. It's mentally draining to think about food all the time and wonder how you're going to segregate your macros out for the rest of the day or whatever. If you can turn off that noise, and as we were talking about earlier, drive up parasympathetic tone, put you in a much better position to enjoy the process and increase the outcome.
Especially post-show.
Yeah.
Especially
post-show is when I most frequently use GLP-1 agonists with clients.
Just you can dissect the two. You've essentially, this is not scientific, is where I look at it with clients. You've got two types of hunger. You've got physiological hunger and you've got hedonistic, dopamine-driven hunger. Like the difference between I would eat a salad, I want a salad, physiological hunger, and I would smash a Ben & Jerry's. That's dopamine driven. Like I want to binge on something nice. If you can take away segment the two and move them away from each other, you haven't got to deal with physiological hunger. So I haven't actually got real hunger. I'm dealing purely with this hedonistic desire to eat, which is going to be there. At least I've only got to fight one battle. I can deal with one thing at a time rather than getting fucking attacked from both sides by both types. You're better set to deal with that in that post-show period, and it just gives you another tool in the arsenal. So when people kind of shit on it, I think it seems a bit moralistically high groundy. You're like, I'm better than you because I don't have to deal with that. Like, why the fuck wouldn't you use it? Like, makes sense to me. Like, if someone's going to say you'd have to be as hungry in a position where the psychological impacts of hunger and binging. You've competed. You probably had a bit of a potentially a tough time post show. You see it time and time again. It makes people feel like shit. If you can remove that a little bit from people's lives, why the fuck wouldn't you? It makes sense.
Yeah, I understand that. I have so much to say, but we just run out of time. So
it's cool, man. I'm barely hanging on, so we're good.
I end every podcast with this question. So basically, if you were to die tomorrow and you had one message you could send to the world, what would each of you guys send?
To the world? To the world.
I would say spend the rest of your life that you have left to live working for something bigger than you and trying to be the best version of yourself. That's all I would try. Just have a purpose, and have part of that purpose be self-actualization, where you can have the best version of yourself that you can possibly bring come into existence, because that's the only way to live life.
Yeah, self-actualization. I like that.
Yeah, if I had to send a message to everybody and it was a short message, it would be aim up, as in always commit your best effort towards aiming at and moving towards what you consider to be the highest good. You know, we were talking about the Bible quote earlier. I'm a bit tired for Bible quotes, but what was it? The walk with me and thou shalt be perfect. I.e., if we have this Judeo-Christian representation of God as being a set of values that are the highest good, like I said, I think now more than ever in today's culture of secularism, nihilism, our firmly held functional values, especially in the West, are deteriorating. I'll say especially here in the US, but you know what they say, the US sneezes and we catch a cold, so it's coming. That deterioration is drifting both men and women away from a set of values that built the greatest culture in history, in my opinion. So aim at the highest good at all times, and you won't go wrong. And you will not only be happy, because in this world of nihilism currently, it's like we do everything on a whim of whatever satisfies us in that moment. But that isn't enough to be fulfilled and to have meaning and to have purpose. But if you aim at something above you, bigger than you, that is the highest good, as I said, then that's the only way to true fulfillment, I think.
I love that one.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of meaning in doing so and doing things for others before you leave the world. So,
no, I love that, man. That got a bit of a deep thought there at the...
I just want to say thank you very much for having us on, bro. I know we spent a lot of time talking, so thanks for listening to us ramble, but I really appreciate the invite to come on, have us chat shit for a couple hours, and yeah, great host.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for inviting us out here. And
yeah,
it's a beautiful city.
That was a fucking novel of info. So
yeah, I'm sorry that we rambled on so long. You can tell that we truly are passionate about this and helping people as much as possible. And if you are ever in the UK, please let me know, man. I've got a place for you. You can stay as long as you like. Have your own gym. So
nice.
It'll be cool.
Fuck yeah. Thanks, bro. I appreciate that, man.
Thank you.
Well, where can everybody find you?
So well, we can find us at Physique Collective. So Physique Collective on Instagram. Joe is Joe_Physique Collective, and I'm Matt_Physique Collective. We've got an app, as we mentioned before, website. It's $9.99 for all the information we kind of talked about in today's podcast, and we have a forum, very, very active. So if anyone's got any questions, they can go and do that. And that is primarily where we're found. We're on TikTok as well, the Physique Collective again, funny enough.
Yeah, TikTok, YouTube. So if you search Physique Collective in the App Store or Google Play Store, you'll see our app, as Matt said. It's only £9.99 a month, which I think at the current exchange rate is about $10 a month. And with that, you get access to all of our content. So I think we've got 300 hours right now of video on there. And the videos there are all broken down in the same way, in the sense of they're going to be less than 10 minutes. They're going to be addressing a single topic. They're edited in a way that you can be presented the graphic information in an easy to understand, simple, basic manner, but also be provided evidence to show that we are supported in what we're saying, and it's not opinion based. It's based on the current best literature that we've got. And again, we've got it translated over all languages, as far as I know, all languages. And the forum there is awesome. Like, shout out anybody listening to this that's on the Physique Collective forum, because you guys make the app what it is. Really thriving, bustling forum where everybody supports one another, helps one another. There's no kind of hierarchy on there. It's just everybody bringing each other up together, aiming at the highest good, like I say. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Sick.
Sweet.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, man.
If you guys would like to support the podcast, you can by rating us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and anywhere you find podcasts, and subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking the bell button, because that's what gets us sick guests like these guys. So love you guys. Hope you guys had a great time. My mind is blown right now, so I'll see you guys later. Peace.
Yeah.